Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Multnomah County Board of Commissioners Board Briefing. Audience members, I want to start by asking you to please silence your electronic devices. For those presenting today, please turn your mic on when you begin speaking and off when you've completed your remarks. For all presenters, please state your name for the record before speaking or responding to questions. This morning, we have a work session on the Homeless Services Department Outreach Services, as well as some other special guests who will be joining us for this. And I want to turn it over to Commissioner Singleton, who requested this briefing.
Thank you so much, Chair. And I want to thank the staff from both the city and county, multiple departments who do outreach work, who put together the materials, but also came to share some with us today. This work session was requested so that we can really understand our outreach services, whether it's navigation, InReach, and you'll learn that these are all different across both city investments and county investments. Again, in light of both jurisdictions being in a scenario of budget reductions, I think it's vital that we take a look at where we might be duplicative, where we could be complementary, and really be thoughtful about our budget investments in the coming year. So with that, I will turn it back over to you to invite our staff up.
Great. I'm going to invite folks to join us today. And as folks are coming down, I just wanted to make sure that everyone knew that outreach has been something I think that we've all been interested in, definitely on my board, in my time on the board, getting to, understand what is happening and how we can be more effective and efficient with it. So I have been talking to Chris Neal, there he is in the back, hello Chris, for a while now about a part of his work coming on as this new COO will be to conduct an assessment of the outreach activities that county departments take on directly or fund other partners to do. So I just wanted to let folks know that that is something that we are going to be working on in the next year, and I think that will coincide well with as we're thinking about budget decisions and the work that we want to see happening in the next year. So thanks to all the staff. So I think that I will invite the folks to come down and who is the first panel today?
We have Homeless Services Department. Is Anna speaking?
Great. So
yes.
We have Anna Plum here. Come on down. It's like the Price is Right. Come on down. Big money. Okay. Perfect. Good morning, Anna. So go ahead and get started. And I think we have, so we're going to have some report outs from different folks. I think we have Homeless Services, Health Department. I see the Human Services, and then we have folks from the city who will be joining us today. So thanks everyone for being here. I want to really appreciate all the work by staff. And I will go ahead and turn it over to you.
Good morning, Anna Plum, Deputy Director for the Homeless Services Department. Get ahead of myself. Sorry, Dan. So we wanted to be very brief today, is my understanding, and just give you all a quick overview of sort of the different types of outreach that we support in the Homeless Services Department, and then I believe you'll hear something really similar from the city, from Portland Solutions. You all have a background memo from us that talks about the kinds of outreach, and I'm just going to quickly highlight sort of the major ways that we think about outreach at the Homeless Services Department. We put them in sort of three categories. The first category is survival outreach. So that's really light touch case management. That is, when we talk about safety on and off the streets, this is part of that safety on the streets aspect of outreach. If there are folks who are living outside, how can we make sure that they are able to survive in the elements? So it's very light touch case management, there's minimal caseloads, and it's really meant to focus on harm reduction, to help access street level medical care as needed, to access behavioral and mental health services as needed, and really advocate for clients and help them navigate to services that might help them. But it's not, so that's one way, and it's the lightest touch sort of survival-based outreach that we have. An example of this is we do a lot of this during severe weather, for example. Outreach workers who perform all different kinds of outreach during severe weather kind of transition to a survival-based outreach model in that time frame. The second one is navigational outreach, and this is like sort of in between survival and housing base, and it's transitional case management. So there's a little bit more case management, and it's really grounded in helping that person problem solve what they need to access services with the ultimate goal, of course, of going into housing. And they engage in some client advocacy, they connect folks to higher level services, and then they would facilitate a warm handoff to a housing-based program. They are not folks who have access to housing resources on their own, for the most part. And then finally, there's housing-focused outreach. And this is sort of, to me, when I say outreach, what I'm thinking about is housing-focused outreach, sort of the originator of outreach. And this is sort of a longer-term housing-focused case management. When we talk about meeting someone where they are, building that relationship, and then helping them on that journey to housing, this is sort of the original way that we think about outreach. They do have access to rapid rehousing, placement resources, and/or other housing resources. And their ultimate goal is to walk alongside that person until they access housing. The other thing I wanted to call out is that I've talked about 3 different kinds of outreach, and I will pause so Portland Solutions can talk about theirs as well. These types of outreach have developed over time. And as such, we've recognized recently that we need to kind of get our arms back around what outreach is and what we want it to do in the community. So we're in the process of doing sort of an evaluation of Homeless Services Department outreach and how we might be able to better coordinate that in the community and make sure it's better aligned with the resources to get folks into housing. We've worked with Health Management Associates to do sort of an evaluation of our current outreach programs. They've made some recommendations, and our office is in the process of implementing some recommendations around better geographic coordination of outreach. We have also realigned all of our outcomes for outreach work so that they are consistent across our contracts and we can report those more robustly, and we're requiring more regular data reporting moving into the next fiscal year. Those are the main things I wanted to cover.
Thank you so much. And I think that, at least for me, as I was going through materials, that was one of the things that stood out, is how do we really look at having similar outcomes, but also make sure that we're tracking any positive outcome. I notice housing placements, there's not a lot that might say placement into treatment or moves in with family and friends. And so coming back to our shelter conversation, what are those positive outcomes that we're seeking from those sort of front-end homeless services? Thanks, Anna. And I'm going to invite Skylar up to talk about some of the city programs.
All right. Good morning, Chair, Commissioners. Skylar Brucker-Knapp, Director of Portland Solutions at the City of Portland. I'm going to give, I was told 3-minute elevator pitch, so sorry, it's very fast. But I think the easiest way maybe to understand the difference and just what Anna was kind of talking about is the city over time, I think, has developed what we're considering outreach for this discussion, but obviously has a first response arm to it as well, as a gap filler mechanism. So we've developed programs where we saw a deep need within different services that the city was offering. So I have folks here who are welcome to answer questions from the CHAT program, which stands for Community Health Assess and Treat, which is in the Fire Bureau. That's a more medical-based intervention to ensure we don't need a fire truck and 6 firefighters to respond to somebody who's in need of medical care. It reduces emergency room visits and really focuses on kind of those high utilizers in our system. Portland Street Response, we've got folks from Portland Street Response here. That's with an alternative to police response. I think all of you are probably familiar with it, but they really focus on 911 calls being diverted from police so that they can respond to those folks in need. It's not traditional outreach because they are responding to those 911 calls. However, they're dealing with a lot of the same high utilizers that I think a lot of our outreach teams across the city, county, and nonprofits are really engaging with. And then the Street Services Coordination Center was developed to really focus on those high impact campers, folks who really were not being addressed by any other kind of mechanism within the system. So really wrap our arms around all of the aspects of outreach, housing placement, and resource connection for those folks that we were really seeing time and time again. And we've got some of our outreach workers here from the Street Services Coordination Center as well. One thing I also just wanted to flag for you all that you might or might not be aware of is after the 90-day fentanyl emergency last year that the chair, the mayor, and the governor called, we were doing daily behavioral health coordination calls, and folks in the field really appreciated that. So we were working with a lot of behavioral health outreach workers, our chat and our PSR teams, and folks who are connected, but maybe just by a phone call or a relationship, and they wanted that touch point to stay in place. So I've been hosting those every Wednesday morning since that 90-day fentanyl emergency, and those have been really helpful for developing new practices. The asks from a lot of those outreach teams are for requests of information umbrella kind of policies that allow them to case manage and kind of connect maybe some different data processes and technological advancements that would actually help everybody understand who's working with whom and really create some more efficiencies in the system to really help people. So we're not duplicating a lot of work. So that's just another piece that we've created based on what we were seeing in the field. But I'll just leave it there. And then if you have any questions, we've got folks who can answer too. Thanks.
Thanks, Skylar. I want to invite up our health department. And while they're coming up, I think just one component for some of what Skylar was talking about is many of those programs they're not doing, as Anna mentioned, the help through to housing placement. And so this is where the city's investments can also look a little bit different. And I will just say part of that comes from the reality for outreach workers that being involved or connected to a sweep had really negative impacts on their relationships with folks. And so it was this idea, excuse me, that outreach workers don't necessarily want to respond to a police intervention and then lose that relationship with the client. And so that's where there's been some development and differentiation. Thank you both.
Good morning. My name is, for the record, my name is Anthony Jordan. I'm the Interim Behavioral Health Director. And I'm going to really speak not in the traditional sense of what we would call outreach, where most of our programming is not where we are going out where someone is on the street, getting someone off the street and getting them into housing. It's primarily around care coordination services or case management services. So in many cases, individuals are calling us when someone is unhoused, like when you're talking about the outreach workers or cultural civic providers, or we're doing some work with the city at the Clinton Triangle. When people have behavioral health needs, whether it's mental health or substance use disorder, and they're unhoused, we're going out coordinating services for both mental health and substance use, getting them into those services, and then following them and get them into transitional housing or recovery housing. So most of our services are related to sort of that type of outreach, not necessarily the traditional sense. We have the PATH team that does primarily a lot of the outreach. We have culture specific providers in each one in the PATH team, both working with the LGBTQ plus community, the African American community, and the Latino community. So they're well connected with those communities. And when people are unhoused, they call and they make a referral to our PATH team when they're unhoused, and then we go out and provide services and then support them through transitional housing and then try to move it into the permanent housing. And then we have the motels where we provide services and services to them as well for mental health. And then Barb is going to speak to the BHRC and some of her programs. Thank you.
Good morning. Hi, Barb Snow. I'm the Senior Manager of Safety Net Services for the Behavioral Health Division. So yeah, I'll speak real quickly to 3 programs that I support that are a little bit more traditional outreach. One of them being the kind of outreach, separate from inreach, sorry, but outreach that the BHRC does. So as part of our BHRC continuum of services, we have an outreach team that coordinates with the Police Provider Joint Connection Team, which is, they're both run by MHAAO, and that's part of that 90-day fentanyl emergency response, and also VAN outreach. So it's really the first point of contact that many individuals have to access our BHRC services. And part of the beauty of that outreach team, and there's actually, like, our comms did an amazing story recently, and it's up on the website, but they'll meet someone in the field, or in this case, it was at an emergency shelter. Outreach team has connects them to the day program, gets them into an urgent bed at the Do Good shelter on the 3rd floor. Do Good kind of stepped in and ultimately got that person into stable housing. So it's this amazing continuum that sort of happens there through the start of that outreach team. The other two programs are more in-reach focused. They're the Old Town in-reach program, again run by MHAO, focused downtown on service providers, not shelters, but service providers for homeless individuals to help with de-escalation, connection, and linkage to services. And the Shelter Behavioral Health Team, which is run by Cascadia and part of the Crisis Continuum of Care, that provides in-reach to primarily county funded, but many shelters, they support at least 12 shelters each month with in-reach activities, and then also do a response to sort of low-level crisis situations that don't require full mobile crisis response, but need someone to come in to help stabilize the person and make sure that they can maintain their shelter placement. So that team's been a really great addition as well to support our community.
Thank you so much. I'm going to have our DCHS folks, and congratulations, by the way. And what I just want to highlight from that conversation is I do think we have work to do to support the health department in capturing any sort of housing placement outcomes. And again, whether that is a treatment or moving in with families and friends, those positive outcomes, if you look at the data, is something that isn't there, at least in what we're currently capturing. Go ahead.
Good morning. How y'all doing? Morning. Hi, Chair. Hi, Commissioners. Thanks for having us. I'm Rachel Pearl. I'm the Deputy Director for Department of County Human Services. I use she, her pronouns. So we've got quite the elevator pitch here. While DCHS is a cornerstone of eviction prevention, our impact extends a lot further than that. DCHS uniquely serves individuals across their lifespan, touching lives at critical moments from childhood to end of life. And this broad reach strategically positions us to address both preventing homelessness and providing vital and specific outreach and services to those who are already experiencing it. Within DCHS, our integrated approach connects specialized care directly with housing and homeless services. This creates stronger wraparound support and reduces the confusion clients often face when they navigate difficult systems. We're actively engaged in addressing childhood and family homelessness, securing housing for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, preventing eviction for vulnerable aging and disabled adults, and providing crucial crisis intervention and outreach to survivors of domestic and sexual violence, which is the leading cause of homelessness for women. And I will pass it to Kristen, who will walk you through a few of the specific direct outreach programs.
Morning, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Kristen Cedar. I'm a Quality Manager in DCHS. Our Aging, Disability, and Veteran Services Division directly engages with the often overlooked crisis of homelessness among adults with disabilities and our aging population. Our innovative Homeless Mobile Intake Team, or HMIT, proactively meets potential clients where they are and reaches into shelters, encampments, and any other location to conduct outreach to connect these folks with supports. This program received a 2024 Aging Innovations Award from US Aging for program excellence and innovation in serving older adults. HMIT provides intensive short-term case management to determine eligibility and readiness for vital long-term services and supports, or LTSS. This is a crucial step in helping people access the ongoing care that they need to achieve stability. So far this fiscal year, HMIT's impact is clear. Out of 233 individuals engaged or referred to services, 110 have been approved for LTSS and successfully obtained housing or residential placement. This includes 18 people securing independent living with crucial in-home support, 43 placed in permanent supportive housing or residential care where their complex needs can be met, and others finding stability through connections with family, recovery housing, and other supportive programs. HMIT fills a critical gap by proactively finding and navigating the complex systems for a population that's often left behind in traditional homeless services. Our Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Services Division, or IDD, directly addresses the unique housing challenges faced by individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities who are experiencing homelessness. Our dedicated IDD housing specialist conducts targeted outreach to this population, connecting them not only to housing case management, but also guiding them through the often complex process of navigating eligibility for IDD services. This combined approach ensures that they receive specialized supports necessary for long-term housing stability. In this fiscal year alone, our housing specialist has reached out to 96 homeless individuals, navigated 33 of them through the eligibility process, and has successfully connected 11 folks to IDD services. Additionally, this resource has directly supported 5 individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities in securing permanent housing. Our Youth and Family Services Division, or YFS, provides early crisis outreach interventions for families experiencing homelessness and offers crucial support to survivors of domestic and sexual violence. Within the Domestic and Sexual Violence Coordination Office, our Unified Response Group provides hospital response for sexual assault, and the DV Crisis Response Unit provides immediate crisis response and outreach to survivors of domestic and sexual violence, the leading cause of homelessness for women. This essential intervention at a moment of extreme vulnerability provides immediate safety and pathways to housing stability, lessening the long-term trauma and housing security that can follow. Our Sun Family Resource Navigators, also within YFS, work within schools and with on-site managers, proactively identifying families experiencing homelessness. This connection to YFS housing services helps remove barriers and increases access to services that support families with children. Programs like Bienestar de la Familia Mercado offer accessible support within trusted community spaces, connecting families to housing resources within broader networks of care. Looking ahead, our Preschool for All program may also offer opportunities to equip early learning providers with the tools to connect families that they serve to essential housing resources and ongoing case management. The strength of DCHS lies in this very connected system of services. Our outreach efforts are not isolated actions. They directly link individuals and families to the services and supports that are essential for lasting stabilization, addressing not only housing, but also the underlying needs that can contribute to housing instability. By effectively connecting individuals experiencing homelessness with Medicaid and other eligible funding streams through integrated housing and support programs, we optimize resource utilization and create potential cost savings for the county. Ultimately, this integrated approach reduces vulnerability and fosters true long-term housing stability, empowering individuals to rebuild their lives and thrive in our community.
Thank you. You mentioned a couple of things that's not actually in our materials, so it would be helpful if you could send us as follow-up what you were reading from so that we can actually get the info from all of those programs. And I think one question I had, because I just couldn't tell from here, is how do people access the outreach here? Is it your teams actually going out in the community? Is it referral-based? What does that look like?
Yeah, most of our programs are in reach. The Homeless Mobile Intake Team is probably the most traditional outreach program. They are often getting referrals from shelters and other providers that are working with folks that are homeless, but they're not typically going out to the street looking for people. They're mostly getting referred in. And all the other programs are in reach or are integrated with other programming.
And on the ones that on HMIT getting referred in, who can refer into that program?
We have staff from HMIT here. So, Jody, do you want to? Hi.
Her pronouns for the Department of County Human Services and Long-Term Services and Supports. Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. Our HMIT program is open to anyone in the community, so it can be a self-referral, it can be a partner, oftentimes they're healthcare providers or EMT. We have really close connections too with the Blackburn Center, different recuperative care programs as people are discharging from hospital and they reach out to us to try to get folks connected with care. And also doing a lot of work at different long-term shelters as well as shorter-term shelters, Y East and some Do Good shelters, Clinton Triangle, et cetera. So we're all over the place. We'll go anywhere we're asked to be.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. That was just the one piece that was missing a little bit for me. So thank you. Thanks for coming.
Can I just add that they also have been really responsive during severe weather activations when we have someone that's been identified, and we think we had 3 people this last activation that were identified as being potentially eligible for those services, and we're really, immediately placed them in a hotel, and then so we could stabilize where they were and then connect them.
Continue follow up. Yes, thank you.
Thank you all so much. So I wanted, I know that folks may have questions. I think we can, of course, ask the staff some questions, but I'd like it mostly to be us having conversation and just acknowledge that some questions may be put in the parking lot, similar to the shelter work session we had here. But some of the questions that come up for me for us to talk through is if there's opportunities that you see for increased coordination between city and county, or how we want to see county programs coordinate more regularly. If there's any particular types of outcomes we're looking for. I mentioned some of them in what was presented to us. Don't talk about some of the positive housing-related placements. That would be something I would be invested in. So I'll pause there and see if folks have any things you want to add to that, or if there's particular questions you have for staff.
Thank you, Commissioner Singleton and board for bringing this conversation forward. I'm really curious to hear, I would love to hear directly from the service providers and just seeing how hearing their feedback layered on top of the work that we're coordinating here between the city and the county, and then really interested in learning more about just the overall coordination. We have the HMIT team, and then the work that our homeless services department is doing. So just getting a better understanding as far as how we coordinate between those services, and like you said already, just whether or not those services are duplicative, and really inviting, again, the service providers into the conversation as well, so we can have a broader conversation, or just a holistic conversation around what's truly happening and what's being offered, what the county has to offer to our neighbors that are struggling.
I can just say a couple of the questions. I did have a couple questions for staff, but one, like, I'm curious for the HST, like, what is the breakdown between those three different types of outreach that's happened, you know, in terms of where does the majority of, or what is the majority type of outreach that's happening? But I think overall, my questions really do center on how information is being tracked, how data is being tracked across all the different types of outreach. Like, are we using HMIS as kind of the base for keeping this information? It feels like probably in some cases, no, if it's more medically, you know, if it's a more medical situation, but we need to, but how are we going to be able to track just how many times a person has been touched by all the different outreach that is happening? And then I really did appreciate hearing about some of the ways that care coordination was happening, or coordinated care and conversations were happening about folks, and how can we really grow that, I think, to, again, understand who's being touched by outreach and what are their needs and how are they flowing through the system to make sure we're driving on the outcomes.
I think what this conversation brought up to me when I have spoken to different organizations that have some level of outreach or inreach in the work they're doing, I'm not sure they're aware of what others do and can offer. You know, I have had several different conversations where outreach workers talk about, you know, when they're working with somebody, the hours that they spend on the phone looking for, maybe it's an emergency placement, maybe it's how to address an unmet medical need or find a family member or whatever. But it does make me wonder, now that we have built some of the technology tools, are we making a system flow that works? If I'm an outreach worker and I work with a specific community, and I am working with an individual who is experiencing significant disabilities that are not being met, do I know exactly how to reach out to, you know, Aging and Disability Services team that can do that assessment and deal specifically with both the housing and the unmet care need? It just kind of leads me to a question of, like, is it a possible next phase as we, again, Chris does some of the work around defining the different elements of outreach and does a good survey, can we then find best practices, but also create the service map, particularly within our systems, so that it shouldn't matter if my encounter happens to be with a culturally specific outreach worker, but I also have a behavioral health need. Like we should make that as easy to coordinate as possible, because that was feedback I was getting, which I think those are just like some of the hardest things to do when you build new systems, is to then figure out how they flow with each other. And so I hope that we can have a conversation about, after we dig into outreach and figure out where we want to go with it, how do we build in that service network and the training necessary for people to know what that even is.
I think I'll just add, I think that comes into that conversation as well around like case coordination. And I think part of like we heard Skylar say, some of that's happening at the city with certain teams. It sounds like it's happening some within DCHS, but to your point, what is that larger picture? And what is the opportunity for case coordination and care coordination across county and city, but all departments?
A little bit of riff off of your comments, Commissioner Moyer, because when I was reading through the materials and thinking about individuals that I've talked to who have either been outreaching or at the other end of the outreach, sort of trying to reconcile what I know the hard work that outreach workers are doing and trying to connect individuals to services, and then reconciling that with the person on the street who's often like, I've never seen an outreach worker, I've never been offered housing or shelter, and kind of like, how do those two universes exist? And when I look at it or think through it and reading through the materials is like the lack of really the connectivity within the system, and sort of standardization of like what does a referral consist of? How are we tracking that? And to your question about data, and then a referral isn't necessarily an outcome; it's an action. And so when I look through much of the data, we see referrals are happening, but it's like, is that referral to, and maybe there is a click down much more detailed data, but when I look at the referral of somebody who's on the street without shelter, there's the referral to shelter, and then there is, maybe it's shelter and a whole host of other services, and then ultimately a referral to housing. But it seems like we don't have that granular detail. So it's when I look at this data, it's like, oh, this looks very promising. And then it's like, wait, is that just because they have 75% of the referrals, the people they had contacts with got referrals? But it was like, well, did anything happen with that? So to me, we're missing data, and then sort of this systemic approach of like, what is a successful outcome, and how do we track that? And not just I think if we track things just to does somebody get in housing and keep it, misses sort of these really important milestones that are what are going to lead ultimately to housing. So I'm looking for more of a system, and I think when the Homeless Services Department, the presentation is like, we now have more outcomes, it's like, by provider level, is it standardized? Is it, are we approaching it in a way that we actually have a system versus people are working really hard, but it's not coordinated with us, with specific outcomes as goals?
I completely agree. This was where I started to go when I was looking at this. And I think as outreach, because again, just like the shelter conversation, this has been a patchwork over time. There was outreach that was happening. It was like one agency, and then there was a need for mental health outreach. And so then that got developed. And so it's just been kind of funding and filling gaps over time. So it isn't quite a system yet. And to me, the question becomes as well, how is this connected to shelter? I will say when I was first running shelter, I had no access to housing placement dollars. And so I made deals with an outreach program to say, hey, I'll give you some guest beds if you can house people out of my shelter. And how do we get out of folks having to do that to find successful outcomes, but actually create a system for the people, no matter what shelter they go in, they have access to this, no matter what outreach worker they come across. They're going to get on our by name list. They're going to get into HMIS. We might find out they already have a case manager. And how can we then do that care coordination? And I think it's easier to think about the county. And I think part of where we have to really push ourselves is to think about that integrated system with the city as well. It may be different roles, but their staff also should be able to access anything that our funded staff do as well. So those were some of the pieces that came up for me too. I know that the department, and I will say, I don't want to, it's not just HSD. We have to be sure, as other departments here were talking, I kept thinking, are they on the by name list? Are we doing assessments for coordinated access, for PSH and all the other components, which some of your teams at the city, I keep pointing to Skylar for those who can't see, some of those at the city funds, their interactions are much more brief and there isn't going to be time to do that. But let's not acknowledge that and let that be one program as opposed to kind of hit or miss.
So how is that leadership structure, the system integration going to happen?
Well, I mean, for me, that's part of the reason of having Chris really take on this work from the county side is to really pull together from the county this understanding. I mean, I'm very interested in the HMA report that the Homeless Services Department did, and I know Dan, this was a priority for Dan to have this. So when that's ready to share, I think there's some learnings on there, and then how do we spread that across the work that's happening in the health department, in the Department of County Human Services, and then with the city as well, because I think the coordinated calls, Sky, that have been running since the 90-day fentanyl emergency have been effective, and let's just make sure that we're able to do that across the city and county so that we're really inclusive there. So that is the task before him. You look at thumbs up, he's ready for it. I think the HSD has done some good starts along that way, and I think now it's just really spreading it and taking it out. And then Commissioner Jones-Dixon, to your point, I do think that the providers are going to be a really key piece in this as well, understanding their experience and what they need, and the awareness that we want to make sure that everybody has who's doing this work of what resources are available. But for me, we now have the data dashboard that gives us so much more information about the by name list of people who are experiencing homelessness. Now it's how do we take all of that data that we have and make sure that we are showing and understanding the path that people are taking and the opportunities to connect with people and really further the work that's happening and getting people housed, getting people connected to services that we need to do.
And there may be things that we think are low-hanging fruit that happen in this budget process. It may be that there's, for some of the program offers, for example, that are connected to this, I see opportunity to add. Let's make sure that we're calculating these housing-related outcomes for some of these programs that are specifically designed to support the homeless community. How are we thinking about HMIS? Like, that's a quick question. Are people in HMIS? It may not be a quick fix, but do we know who is and isn't entering in that system? And again, coming back to coordinated access and the assessments for PSH, is everybody trained and have the ability to do that regardless of if they're a county funded employee or a city funded employee, and regardless of which department they come from? So those, I think there's some low hanging fruit that at least we can ask the questions and get something in place for some of those through this coming budget cycle.
Go ahead.
I'm just going to rip briefly off that. I mean, with the sort of reduction of fundings, putting our money behind the most effective strategies, it would be really helpful, because to have at least a framework as we approach the budget process. Because when I look at, I think there's just sample provider reports. I mean, there's some that have like no goals around some things, and really varying results, and there may be good reasons for that. But I think it's a great opportunity to be like, we have to use our dollar the most effective way we can. And what are we trying to achieve, and identifying those outcomes, and then who's getting them and who needs help if they're not reaching those goals. How do we do that? But I'd love to have that before we go into the budget process versus having it trailing into next year. No pressure.
I think there's some of that can be a part of this discussion. And I want to also come back to the conversation we had around shelter. There's a question for me of, do we need X number of outreach? What was the table, like 12? Is it all outreach? What is the in-reach needs? How do we help the lack of flow we have out of our congregate shelters in particular? We also know that we have less housing placement out of alternative shelters this year because of budget reductions and inability to place people. How do we think about the program and the system in a way that is really geared towards both that outreach component, but that in-reach component?
One of the things that I think about, as I'm kind of a systems thinker, so I do like to have some level of uniformity in which to compare. I think you can have uniformity in measurement and even uniformity in how we define the work that's being done without limiting the creativity of how you do it, because I think that that's where you miss opportunity, is when you get too uniform in like the definition of like where you're going to meet people, or, but I do think I agree with Commissioner Brim Edwards around how do we get to a place in which we can make informed resource decisions about outcome, with that layer of there's mitigating factors. There are some situations that are much harder and take, probably a higher amount of resources to achieve the same outcome. And I certainly don't want us to just be serving the easiest to serve, but I do think being able to identify that and then also show the outcome for that, for what was necessary. Here's all the things that were necessary to get that person in the right situation. It does bring up for me questions about what we need to know to figure out where future investment needs to be. I think I'm a little nervous about a myopic focus on shelter beds, not because I don't think that's important. We need shelter beds, but I worry we're losing the conversation about housing. Because in my definition, which, I think it would also be nice to have all of our partners and us agree on what the definition of success is. But, I definitely come from I want to measure success incrementally, but the final measurement is a stable long-term housing that will work for somebody. That is, to me, how we say, yeah, we have achieved that for someone. I want to know that we've made progress along, where are they in their initial engagement? How long did it take to get shelter? How long were you in that setting? Did you address barriers, if that exists in your life? But ultimately, I am concerned that we are going to have a bottleneck situation if we do not have housing, and this is a very difficult environment to build new housing. So I think having conversations about strategies of increasing housing for both population A and B. I'm very nervous about A, but both are very real right now. In this environment where it costs more to build than buildings are worth, how do we keep and grow our housing stock for families who are going to be hopefully progressing out of congregate shelters and other.
I so appreciate that, and I think this is how they're all starting to link for me as well, right? Some of what you mentioned is what a draft proposal I put forward for SHS reform around like decreasing length of time from street to shelter, decreasing length of stay in shelter. How can we really focus on the things that lead to what actually ends somebody's homelessness, which is affordable housing? I think that I'd be curious if there's a way we can have that as part of our discussion when we do our next joint session with the city, to both talk about these homeless services, but also have some of the conversation about that housing component and the need to be able to get folks into that. I got a question the other day, was like, if we had the housing at 0 to 30, could people move in tomorrow? It's like, absolutely, we could clear out multiple shelters if there was places that folks could afford. And so I think it's important that we hold both in our conversation. Another piece I will say again is that piece around the bottleneck, and what is the policy direction we want to give around outreach, in-reach, housing placement out of shelter. I think there's opportunity to decide if housing placement that's connected to shelter, is it as effective, or would it be more effective for the outreach worker to keep working with that person through their shelter stay? These are all conversations that I think are part of what I'm thinking about and kind of gearing towards asking in this budget process.
I appreciate the conversation, and Commissioner Moyer, I really appreciated the acknowledgement that there's multiple different types of outreach that's happening. And so ultimately, like looking at that ultimate goal and the way that we get there through the different parts of the outreach might look a little different depending on the population that's being served, depending on really what the goal of that outreach is. But I think for me, that's why it's important to understand who's being who's being contacted, who's being worked with, where that is happening, how many touches, what are the goals of those touches, and then ultimately, like, what is the path that that person is on, to see how we are ultimately getting that person into treatment or recovery or housing or whatever that or connected with a caseworker for the services that they are eligible for, all of that, just to see that pathway. So I think that's important. I think that does tie really closely with some of the work that is happening and the conversations that you've started and we've had actually at the Steering and Oversight Committee around shelter and the types of shelter and what that looks like and the effectiveness of those shelters and what are the resources that need to be at those shelters to make them, a place where people are moving through, as well as looking at some of the investments that we've been making around the behavioral health system and the needs around there. So so appreciate the conversation. And then, and I am gonna just, I'd love us to be able to move on, and we still have like about 10 minutes, but I just want to make sure because we do need to get onto our budget stuff later today too.
I would really encourage, as we sort of walk through this conversation, that we have rigor around the word referral, because being in another large public system, a school district, where it's like, I gave them a referral, is often I did my job. And I think as sort of leaders in the system, like having rigor around, yes, that's like without a referral, often something doesn't happen, but a referral can't be like the end answer. It's like, because I think that will prevent us from knowing whether those referrals are successful. So like referral to what? Did it work? And if it didn't, then what do we need to do differently? Or do we need to do it again? But when I see like a columns or sort of quantitative data around referrals, it doesn't tell me very much. And this is the same question I've had around the deflection center. Like, we gave somebody 3 referrals. It's like, to what, and did they access it, and did they actually have a success? So I think, again, us having the sort of the rigor around keeping after it and digging into like what was the outcome of that referral and again, more of the curiosity of like, if something, the referral wasn't successful or that somebody didn't follow through, like why not? And what we can do differently to actually make it be a successful referral. So just a general conversation I'd have, because we can't just count our success as we had X number of referrals.
Yeah, I think the work that's happening at the Deflection Center, I mean, I hear you say that, and I know a lot of that coordination and follow-up does happen at the county in different ways. And I'll just use the Deflection Center where people get referrals, but then there's a lot of case management and follow-up afterwards to really see what are the outcomes of that referral. Are they actually taking advantage of something that they've been referred to? And I think that is a really important piece. And that coordinated case management, I think, has been a successful model that's been used to help do that. So I appreciate that point.
And I completely agree, because partially it's a referral to what tells us what else might be a backlog in the system. I can guarantee you one of those is a referral to treatment, right? Where, especially if it's inpatient, residential, transitional recovery, we know that there's bottlenecks there. So there's value in some information from frontline staff of, again, how can we think about this without making it cumbersome? But it would be so helpful for us to know, hey, we actually have to make an investment over here, because this is where a lot of referrals are going that aren't successful.
It's really a tool for system improvement versus like some sort of punitive, like you had an unsuccessful referral, more like why wasn't it, and how do we as leaders and systems, as we're making investments, how do we address those pieces versus like it was a referral to nothing because that service actually wasn't accessible.
Absolutely. I want to acknowledge that the Homeless Services Department is in the midst of some process improvement. So I think on the other side of the budget or during the budget, we'll be able to hear a little bit more about what that might be. And hopefully some of what was discussed today can be helpful as they're working through that and working with providers. I completely agree about provider voice, and that was something that was my last question for you all, was which I know we don't have time for, so don't worry, Chair. But just if things are coming to you about what you'd like to hear from providers, if you want to send that to us, Quinn can collate that in my office, and we can be sure to share that back with the department as they're going through their process and see what they could feed in or weave into that. But I also just want to, again, thank everybody. I know this was a lot to pull together, and it doesn't even fit as neatly into the boxes that we've talked about today, right? Some inReach does outreach, some outreach does inReach, everybody does navigation. So it's not quite as clean cut as like this shelter is this type. So I want to appreciate the staff and the work you did to help this be more transparent for us as policymakers, so we can really be thinking about how we move things forward. And Sky, let me know how and if and where we can continue to coordinate with you and make sure that the city is fully integrated into this conversation.
Just also want to ensure that we invite Gresham into the conversation as well, because they have a separate homeless services division. I know they're working with you all too, but just because their approach is unique and different, it'll be interesting hearing their perspective as we're moving this work forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris, did you want to come up? I saw you. Oh, okay. You just got too close. So then if you get too close, we're going to pull you in. All right, great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Commissioner Singleton, for hosting this conversation. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for all the staff from across the county and from the city for being here. Really appreciate. We know there's a ton of work being done. We know that there is contacts being made all throughout our city and county to try to get people connected to the help, to the services, to the shelter, to the housing, to the healthcare that's available. And we, I think all of our intentions are to make sure that that work is having the most impact, is helping the most people, and really getting us to a place where our systems are serving the people that they're meant to in the best way possible. So thank you so much for that. More to come on that conversation. So I will. We will hear more on the work that Chris and his team will be doing and the opportunities that we'll have for these conversations during the rest of our budget. So with that, I'm going to adjourn our board briefing for today, our work session for today. We are going to now move into our budget work session number 1. All right. And we'll take a minute for folks to So we are going to reconvene and move on to our budget. So anyone having conversations, if you could take those to the lobby, we would appreciate that. So the board can make sure everybody has money for next year. So. That's what I said. I'm like, it is in your best interest for us to do this work. All right, good. Welcome back, everyone. This is the Multnomah County Board of Commissioners' very first fiscal year 26 budget work session. Just a reminder for folks to silence your electronic devices. And for those presenting today, please turn your mic on when you begin speaking so that that green light is showing, and off when you're done speaking so that the red light is showing again. And please remember to state your name for the record before speaking or responding to questions. So we are kicking off our FY26 budget work sessions with the report out from the Central Community Budget Advisory Board. So we're really pleased to have some guests here today. It's important, I think, that we're starting off from this place. We have about a half hour for that this morning. I'm grateful that we do have the opportunity to say thank you and reflect on the good work the community has provided us at this stage in our budget process. This is an all-volunteer committee that donates substantial time to Multnomah County to make our budgeting process more transparent and reflective of community values and concerns. So our central CBAC is made up of folks from all of the other departmental CBACs. And I want our central CBAC and all of the folks who are working on this for our community to know first and foremost that we have heard your feedback from the last year and have put in real effort, energy, and intention to making meaningful changes in this process. And I want to really thank Amada Perez for all of the work that you have been doing around this. I know that coming on board in your new position, you have really lifted up the work that Stephen in my office had been doing and moved it forward. This has been a real transitional year for process adjustments. We knew this going in, and it has been likely the case in some of your experiences. We wanted to make some changes for this year as we're looking at the long term. That might have felt rushed or bumpy. There's definitely more room for improvement. So we are going to keep doing that both in this budget cycle and the next. I do look forward to us turning over a new year in July when our Office of Community Involvement will be able to further strengthen the program, adjust the timelines for our full year of the budget cycle, implement the code changes that we passed in February, and offer many substantial and new recommendations to make this process smoother, more timely, and more representative. So Amada, I know that you're integrating the process improvement feedback that you get to further changes for the FY27. Any feedback that we hear today or that's provided from the board or the CBACs as we go through the department budgets, we are going to be tracking those and including those. So thank you for your commitment, Amada, for this work and your commitment to process improvement. And I will invite you now to kick us off this morning. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, Commissioners. For the record, my name is Amada Perez, and I'm the new Director of the Office of Community Involvement, or OCI. And I'm here this morning with the co-chairs. We're waiting for one more person, but our co-chairs from the Central Community Budget Advisory Committee, or the Central CBAC. I am very inspired that we kick off the budget work sessions by centering community input in the process. So it is a privilege to be here and to offer a very brief update on the CBAC improvement effort, which launched last September. It has been a top priority for OCI since I started 7 months ago, and for the first time, the key focus of this year's Central CBAC, expanding the role of the Central CBAC from not just giving input on departmental budget memos across the county, but also continuing the effort of the CBAC Improvement Work Group. So working collectively through a cross-departmental perspective to assess and recommend ongoing improvements to the county's CBAC program. I want to start with a little bit of context, and then I'm going to turn it over to our co-chairs. Next slide, please. OCI is a team of 3. A primary function of OCI is to directly support 2 community advisory programs, both in the charter, the Community Involvement Committee and the CBACs. Our office is also dedicated to supporting county-wide engagement efforts, including and beyond advisory committees, and collaborating closely with departments and staff to strengthen program-based engagement, really aiming to serve as a teaching, learning, resource hub for county education engagement and equity. Next slide, please. CBACs were created to strengthen and expand avenues for community involvement in the budget process. They are one of several ways that the county invites community input on budget priorities. In the case of the CBAC, CBAC volunteers get to hear directly from department leadership and staff about county programs and services and work collectively to provide input on how Multnomah County can best use its departmental resources to serve diverse community needs. There are 10 CBACs and 1 central CBAC, as the chair said, comprised of representatives from each of the departmental CBACs. Next slide, please. As you know from code, it is OCI's role to provide administrative guidance on CBAC policies, procedures, training, technical assistance, and support the 10 departmental staff teams that are assigned to coordinate their respective CBACs. OCI conducts outreach activities to recruit community members for departmental CBACs, and we coordinate the CBAC orientation and onboarding for community members, and we serve as the staff team and support for the non-D CBAC and the Central CBAC. Next slide, please. The CBAC improvement effort launched in the fall of 2024 with support and direction from the chair's office was grounded in inquiry and listening and the identification of a set of pressing issues and recommendations for change. Some of those changes were code changes, and with your support in February, those changes were approved and are now acting as a foundation for the programmatic changes, which require us to finish this year and to plan, design, build, and prepare for the next fiscal year, which is what OCI has been doing since the last time we saw you. For the sake of time, I wanted to present a very high-level view of these programmatic changes that we will launch in July using a timeline with a couple of examples to illuminate the direction that we're moving. It is my plan to follow up this week with each of your offices to schedule more time for a deeper dive into those details and be in discussion with you. Thank you. Next slide, please. So as context, this is the program model that my office inherited and one that we are still currently impacted by this fiscal year. A couple of practices that I want to highlight from this old model is 3 months dedicated to outreach and recruitment, only 3 months dedicated to outreach and recruitment, without a targeted outreach plan and without a participant management system. A 2-hour orientation workshop comprised of 3 to 4 office presentations as the only onboarding and educational activity provided by our office. These practices and others have contributed to some of the pressing issues raised in the listening sessions last year, continue to be named by frustrated participants this year, and issues you have actually raised at the board level. Issues like a lack of diverse representation, low participation numbers, limits to meaningful input, and inadequate onboarding and orientation. The new model we are launching in July is a working model, but one that aims to address some of these and other persistent issues. Next slide, please. Working closely with the budget office, we have outlined a set of monthly budget milestones. And originally my slides were meant to scaffold this, so I apologize, it's all being presented in one. So I'm gonna go kind of line by line here. But working closely with the budget office, we have outlined a set of monthly budget milestones during the 9-month budget cycle that actually grounds the CBAC program activities. Instead of 3 months of outreach and 1 cohort of board appointees, starting in July, OCI will use a new application and a volunteer management system to engage in year-round outreach, recruitment, and selection with quarterly board appointments, as well as a better way to track demographic information, attendance, vacancies, terms, and stipends. Using the equity lens, OCI will use targeted outreach strategies to coordinate intensive outreach in the summer and will maintain moderate ongoing outreach activities during the 9-month budget cycle to limit vacancies and better achieve the participation of diverse identities and preferred experiences as outlined in the code. Instead of a single 2-hour orientation, OCI is building a comprehensive county and budget education plan with a robust range of activities during the summertime, including across-departmental meetings, tours of county sites, offices, and buildings, workshops, presentations, and even independent learning modules. And ongoing educational activities will continue during the budget cycle to support continued learning and onboarding of new members. This educational program is driven by a set of 5 integrated learning areas, each with articulated and measurable learning outcomes. And as outlined in the code, the educational program will help us achieve our commitment to deepen participants' understanding of county departments, the relationship between those departments, the communities they serve, and the needs of the individuals who access those services. To better synchronize CBACs not only with each other across the country, but also in relation to the budget cycle, we have created a sort of 9-month itinerary of key program monthly benchmarks that are aligned to the monthly budget milestones. And I look forward to sharing this detailed itinerary with each of you when we have more time for these layers and discussion. To do better on illuminating the impact of CBAC input, we are committing to 4 feedback touch points so that CBACs will hear back from not only the chair on how budget memos impacted budget allocation, but also from OCI on how participant feedback impacted program improvement. I thought so, thank you. Finally, we are adding assessment touch points using surveys, interviews, and focus groups to invite participant and program evaluation to improve retention, participant satisfaction, and overall civic engagement. In addition to the programmatic changes in July, we will add a new repository of program resources, a policy and procedure guidebook that has been co-created with departmental CBAC coordinators, onboarding checklists, and a range of templates and tools. We combine code changes, program strategies, participant management systems, and a repository of resources with staff support. So OCI will expand our support to CBAC coordinators from across the county from monthly meetings to now include an end of budget cycle retreat in service to program improvement and a beginning of budget cycle orientation in service to peer-to-peer training and the collective use of best practices. So thank you for this opportunity just to share a brief update on what we've been working on since the last time we were here. I think that budget work sessions are an example of that intersection between a program benchmark and a budget milestone. And over the next few weeks, you will hear from all 10 CBACs, not only about their budget recommendations, but also about the challenges of participating on a CBAC. Both are critical to this process, to our office and the chair's commitment to improvement. So at this time, it's my pleasure to introduce this fiscal year's Central CBAC Committee by name. Next slide, please. Oh, next. Oh, sorry, all the way to the other slides. Sorry. There we go, thank you. And today, representing the Central CBAC, we had 2 co-chairs, but I'd like to introduce one of our co-chairs, Danny DeMello. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning, thank you. I'm Daniel DeMello, I'm one of the co-chairs of the Central CBAC. Please forgive me if I stumble over my notes. I thought I'd be co-presenting today, but that's just how it goes. I do want to just note everything that was just presented about the new CBAC model is new to me, and I really look forward to OCI bringing this to the Central CBAC to discuss before it is implemented. But we're here today, the Central CBAC, to look at this system because the CBAC system depends on community participation. And community participation only happens when people feel that their time and their expertise is genuinely valued, that it's easy and meaningful to get involved. And so in order to come to today, we read CBAC reports from this year and in previous years and conducted a survey of our members. And we found persistent time pressure on CBAC work, gaps in recruitment, diversity, and community representation, and inconsistent compliance with county code requirements. And our goal today is to share what we've learned from this year's experience, both the successes and the challenges, and to begin a conversation about strengthening the CBAC process to go forward. Now, you might be wondering why we're here today at all. If you were looking at the board last year, the board received a presentation in September that outlined some initial ideas for updating CBAC code and referenced a pause that was being put on CBAC reporting around the budget. But then in February this year, you finalized changes to the CBAC code that introduced a new requirement that the Central CBAC submit a written report before departmental budget hearings, which we interpreted as the departmental budget work sessions. I do want to note that between that September review and in February, the Central CBAC was not meeting, nor was it involved, but these code changes were introduced. And it wasn't until March in a meeting that myself, my co-chair, and Amara recognized that these code changes meant that this pause that was put in place last year could no longer be in effect. That because the board had passed these code changes that required us to submit a written report, we had to submit a written report. And that's why today you have a 2-sentence written report because we had to submit something that was written down. But we did view it as a good opportunity to say, look, we can take this time to look at the problems that we're having. And so today, I'm just presenting to you problems. We're gonna come back after the budget cycle with solutions. And I think having that kind of cadence is really pretty beneficial. And to jump into that, I want to start with a positive note. 100% of our members on the Central CBAC viewed the experience as a positive experience and would recommend the experience to a friend. That's great. However, I think overall, one of the larger challenges we had looking at the problems across the CBACs is that there was so much variation in terms of the practices and challenges. Some CBACs believe that they're not allowed to take written notes because of public records issues. Some CBACs have very different practices. It's really hard to make comparisons between these groups that are extremely different. But overall, the number one issue we're seeing is this time crunch. Now, this year, that was part of the reason we saw this time crunch is because of a very well-intentioned push to have the CBACs submit our memos a few weeks prior to the release of the chair's budget. The idea being that we would have more of an impact. Unfortunately, not all of the CBACs, I don't know how many of them, actually do begin meeting in October. Many of them begin meeting in December or January. And so as a result, we had less time this year to convene and discuss and provide that written report. Hopefully, that means that, in exchange, we had more of an impact. That second issue around diversity and community representation, as a group, we were pretty split about whether we were or weren't diverse. We haven't seen any demographic data from the county demonstrating that the CBACs are or aren't diverse. I just want to make that clear, before we say that we have a problem with diversity, we should probably show in which ways we're not diverse. Although from a very quick review of publicly available data, there is a sense that there may be some underrepresentation of people who are over 65, some underrepresentation of people who are under 30, an overrepresentation of registered Democrats, and an underrepresentation of people who are registered to no party or registered to the Republican Party. But without better data, we can't really meaningfully assess whether we are representing the community. One of the larger challenges we've seen is this question around recruitment and retention. And to note, to begin, the county code changes that you introduced in February introduced this new concept that there's a minimum of 7 members on the CBACs. Now, unfortunately, only 40% of the CBACs today have that minimum number of people. As a result, we have seen kind of continued issues around maintaining quorum, around maintaining continued interest. The Sheriff's CBAC, for example, noted in its FY23 and its FY24 reports that it had less than 5 members. Last year, it had 3 members. This year, it has 4 members. It's really hard to kind of say that these things are important, that these, that we're going to have these groups if we're not able to maintain these bare minimums around participation. And also, I don't know. I would love for for someone to answer this legal question. But now that there is this minimum 7-member requirement, do the CBACs need to have 7 members in order to submit their reports and in order to meet as a CBAC? I will also want to note that code does require that members be appointed by the board. However, multiple CBACs this year reported including members in meetings before their formal appointment by the Board of Commissioners. For example, the Sheriff's CBAC report notes that they met 5 times starting in December, but all 4 of the members were only officially appointed by this board on February 20th of 2028. Or February 20th of this year. The JOHS CBAC noted that 3 of its members, quote, served but were technically not appointed. Their terms begin March 15th, 1 day after this report is due. And this also raises these legal questions around public meetings and public records. If someone is acting as if they are a public official but have not yet been appointed, are the notes that they produce as a result of that work a public record? It's this kind of edge case question that does not need to be asked if we just properly appointed people and maintain full participation in these groups. I also want to note that code does say that we are appointed to 3-year terms on these committees. That would be a calendar year. We've interpreted that as practice as 365 days times 3. We do see about 10% of the people listed in the CBAC reports this year, their terms have expired. So we do see a continued practice of people continuing to serve on CBACs after their term is actually expired. And that's really hard to, again, say that this work is important if we can't maintain these basic elements of compliance with the law. If we want to uphold the rule of law, let's uphold the rule of law. And I do just really want to say also that part of the reason that we presented this report was this introduction of these new deadlines for us. We as a committee did not, as you can see, we did not have representation from all of the CBACs. Now, the code changes introduce this requirement that each CBAC appoint someone to the central CBAC by the date identified by the budget office. And I had a conversation with the budget office yesterday. They were not made aware that there was a date that they were to identify. They weren't sure where that came from. There is no date that they were required to appoint people to our committee. And so I'm not really sure why there was this haste to get these code changes out in February, but as a result, we failed to have full representation on our committee. Most of the committees failed to have full representation, and it introduced all of these legal and procedural questions that have had a huge impact on the legitimacy of our work. And so in conclusion, we see these time pressures, and I'm really very excited for this new program. I think that will help a lot of it. We do see these gaps in recruitment, this diversity and this community representation, and this really long-standing and deeply troubling inconsistent compliance with the requirements of county code. And as a committee, we're now moving from identifying these problems towards recommending solutions. And so we invite the board and the public to join us in strengthening the CBAC system to make it as strong, effective, and representative as possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Amada, for all the work that's happening. We do have about 5 minutes for questions so I want to open it up to the board for any reflections or comments. Commissioner Singleton, and then we'll go to Commissioner Jones Dixon.
Thank you. Thank you for the work that's going into this. Thank you for your service in multiple CBAC spaces. I think a lot of this that you mentioned has come up before, and it sounds like some of that is work in progress, and some of it is maybe needs to be a plan made around. And I would say similarly for me, when I read the CBAC letters, there's some sort of mention of needed process improvement in almost every one. And so are you taking that feedback as well to incorporate it into the next steps?
Yes, thank you for asking that. We are doing that. We are also working on a survey right now that all CBAC participants will take at the end of the budget cycle to add to that body of input to inform ongoing and continued changes in the program.
Thank you so much. I would just also recommend, if it hasn't been worked out, that you all make sure the departments are preparing for rolling appointees so that there isn't constant onboarding for the whole CBAC, but there's a plan specifically for the new appointees as they come on board. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Jones Dixon.
Great, thank you, Chair, and thank you both thank you for your service, and thank you for the presentation. Like I said, you dropped a few bars. It was poetic. I think a lot of the things that you mentioned, Co-Chair, is being addressed through the work that you're bringing forward and working on. I guess the only recommendation that I would ask or put forth is just intentionally working with the co-chairs as you're carrying out the things that you put forward. But I'm extremely hopeful and excited to get to work.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioner.
So since we had a 2-sentence report, I'm curious, are we going to get a full report at some point in time?
Yes, so the plan was, and this was the plan in September, that our committee would produce a full report on problems and identifying solutions that would be submitted after the end of the budget cycle. That's still our intention, just knowing that we had to submit something and present something today. We decided we would kind of front load looking at the problems and now move on to solutions.
And then my other question would be, so since almost the first week of joining the county commission, there's been questions about whether how the Central Budget Advisory Committees, I'm going to try not to use acronyms, trying to slip into county speak. There's been questions just about compliance with the code, and this is maybe a question for council of like how it, which is concerning that we're continuing to have questions about whether how the budget advisory committees are operating, and I'm wondering, I can ask you, or I could ask county council of like how we're ensuring that we're actually following the code.
Thank you for the question. I mean, so just so you know, this was a transition year in many ways, including the fact that we had code changes that happened in February where we were kind of in the middle of a budget process. So I think some of the So I think we're still in that transition as the code is now, came into effect in March, and really making sure that all of the processes and procedures and the workflows throughout the department and at the organization matches what the code updates have required. And so I think that's part of the work that Amada is going to be doing, as well as working with all the departments, including our budget office, to make sure that happens. And I appreciate, Daniel's really good at flagging those and noting those, so that's super helpful for making sure that we are going to be consistent with that moving forward.
Yeah, like I say, it's just been a two years where we've had, and it's been a different set of issues, and many of them have been addressed. And for the legitimacy of the process, I think we need to, the code changes have happened, they've been implemented, so we should follow the code. So I'd really hope that we would not wait till after the budget process is over, because now entering, yet another budget year, that we should make sure that the integrity of the work is, again, follows the county code.
Yeah, I think to the fullest extent possible, everybody wants to be in alignment with the code. I think some of it is the minimum number of folks on a CBAC, right? That might be hard to bring more people on as we're in the middle of a budget session where the reports have already been turned in, but that will be a priority. We've talked about recruiting like that. It's a priority to make sure that we have a robust recruiting process and we are able to fulfill those code things. So that's one thing where I do think that there is going to need to be some implementation time to make sure that we are fully in compliance with the code. But again, the intention for all of us is to make sure that the county is in compliance with the code and that it works for, so that we can have a really, I think, robust and effective process for as we move forward. And then
just one other just comment. I appreciate you sharing sort of what the new structure and sort of how the processes will lead to hopefully a very robust community budget engagement process, and that the members feel that they have provided something that's impactful, that's of use. I think one thing I would want to just flag is, as a commissioner, I sometimes wince at the word recruitment, because it can be, and again, this is from being around public processes for a long time, sometimes recruitment can lead to non-independent thought. So we're recruiting a specific alignment with or thinking about the budget versus having what I really value is the diversity of the viewpoints and expertise that's brought, and the independence. So it's not actually coming from county staff. It's an independent group that had appropriate training. They know about the department's budget, the needs. But they also, at the same time, are looking at it from an independent perspective and providing that sort of independent community viewpoint versus just, are they aligned with the county department's viewpoint about the budget? And so I don't know quite how you get that, but I want to make sure that we're not just recruiting individuals who will be aligned with what the departments want to have in their budgets, but that bring that either lived experience, independent expertise, and they feel like they can, if they disagree with the department or have a different perspective, that they feel comfortable that they can put that on the table, and that the commission has the benefit of that point of view. And again, it will, I think, make our process stronger, and that's the whole, I think, the purpose of having diverse community budget advisory committees, is that they can bring things that we wouldn't get from the department. So just.
yeah, please.
How do we, could you walk us through how do we accomplish that? And then how are we going to facilitate that going into the future with this new?
Yeah, I wanted to thank you for both those questions. One, I had sort of a question maybe that will then help me answer is, do you think it's helpful that OCI owns the sort of recruitment for all the departments? Do you think it helps to mitigate some of that concern you have around for example, if, departments were recruiting independently for participants, that we may run into that. But the fact that OCI does the heavy lift of outreach and recruitment in the summer, and we hold the application, and then folks are identifying which CBAC they want to work on. They usually pick 3. And then we give those names to the departments, and they conduct their interviews, and then they do their selection process. So do you think that that's a helpful practice?
I do.
Okay.
And I also think it's worthwhile also for departments. I'm not saying the department shouldn't do recruitment or, funnel people into like, you're interested in our, our department or the services we provide. Here may be a way you engage. So I don't want to say like they shouldn't provide any recruitment. I'm just generally want to. So I think it's helpful to go to a central place.
Yeah.
And I think there's ways to also give people permission to be like, we're not just looking for people who are agreement, but people who will provide sort of an independent viewpoint or feel free to bring their perspective to the table, even if it's different from the department.
Yeah.
And that ties into the question, like, how do we facilitate that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that shocks me the most is that there is no centralized volunteer management system. And so I think that's going to be one big, huge change in the way we do recruitment. A shared application, one system that manages that and holds all the content. I think the other is really leaning into best practices around targeted outreach. So we have now in code some real preferences and priorities for communities that we want to be at the table. So developing tools to assess current participation through that same set of priorities so that we know where we need to focus our outreach, and then doing that targeted outreach in the summer as one of our priorities in terms of the work that we do. And then having these interview questions that help us to dig deeper into diversity of perspective and selection processes that can be tracked and measured and really compared across all of our CBACs. So I think that will, those are some of the systems that will be helpful for us in doing that work.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Commissioner Moore, and then Commissioner Steele.
I raised my hand.
I thought we didn't have to do that at work session. The rules are always changing.
I just want to make sure I'm just trying to facilitate good conversation.
One of the things that's important to me, particularly at the department level CBAC, is a significant participation of people who receive services from that department. I just think that's a viewpoint that has to be lifted up, because it's not going to be the same as the general public. I also do believe that people who work for organizations we contract with can be appropriate because they've got a significant amount of expertise, but should not be a majority ever, because I do think that it is a perspective that we should hear, but not let it be dominant. Because, I think there are lots of wonderful people who volunteer, and I'm very grateful for that. But I think for us to get, particularly at the department level, to get really meaningful input, it is incredibly important to try to engage people who have significant knowledge of these programs. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Very similar. I think that there's a piece of this where there are these other advisory groups, again, coming back to this enormity of advisory bodies we have, that if I was on the CBAC, I would want to hear from the folks with lived experience group or whatever that might be called in another department. I would want to hear from providers. And so some of it is, what does the whole process look like? And maybe it's not all membership, but it's the opportunity to hear the feedback from the folks in the work. I would also add that almost none of these talk about meeting with frontline staff of the departments. So whether that's the providers or it's the department staff themselves, they should absolutely be a part of that process. And then this is just a personal desire. If we could have a template, it would be amazing. I think there's things we all want to know out of the CBACs. And then there can be kind of narrative and randomness at the other side of it, but it would be really nice if each spoke to some specific things that we think are important to hear from a CBAC on.
Yeah, great suggestions. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. Well, really appreciate that. Thank you, Daniel, for all your work on this. I look forward to the work together, with our existing CBACs, with the departments. I think one thing that's good, and the board may know this, but, for a long time, CBACs were really managed by the departments, except for the central and the non-D work. And so the fact that Amada, you and your team have been bringing a lot more consistency throughout the experience, I think is going to address some of the inconsistencies or the different. We have people who have loved being on their CBAC and others who have really had more of a struggle. And so I think this is going to be helpful overall. I do just want to note that in my budget, I have made the CBAC coordinator position a permanent position for the OCI. Office of Community Involvement, to support both countywide and departmental CBAC. So making sure that consistent staffing position is going to be there to help move this work forward. So thank you.
Thank you,
very
Chair.
much. All right.
All right. Thank you, Commissioners.
Great. So now we are going to move into our next work session. Thank you. And again, we'll be hearing more from the CBAC members through each of the departments' presentations that we'll hear over the next several weeks. So we'll now move to our second work session on equity in budgeting. I would like to invite Christian Elkin, Joy Fowler, and Sophie Wilson to come up to the front. We know equity is an integral part of our budgeting process, and so really grateful for this chance for the board to hear all about the work that is happening. Has happened so far in the budget process and what this will look like over our next 6 weeks as we engage in the more public part of the budget process. So let's talk a little bit more about how these values show up in budgeting. Good morning.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Christian Elkin, County Budget Director. I use she, her pronouns. I'm here very excitedly with Joy Fowler, our Office of Diversity and Equity Director, and from the Department of County Assets, and I always bring my trusted companion, Jeff Renfro, with me because I don't like to be alone up here at this dais. It's a very big budget, so we share that responsibility. So I just want to kick it off here to talk about really quickly, if we can go to the next slide, some of the things that we're going to talk about this morning. We're going to talk about equity in the budget process. We're also going to talk about the budget process itself, the calendar, some of the things that we've been discussing for the last couple of weeks. And then we're going to get into a lot of numbers. So it is a budget presentation. It should have numbers. Just as a reminder, we're really going to talk about top line investments, top line themes, and then as we move through the budget process, we'll start to drill down on a lot of that information. So with that small introduction, I'll turn it over to Joy and Sophie and just really appreciate the strong partnerships that we have with your offices. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Christian. It is always a pleasure to be up here with you. Budget is my favorite thing, and you know that. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Joy Fowler, for the record. Use she, her pronouns. And if I could have there you are. So one of the things for the Office of Diversity and Equity is we think of the budget as a reflection of our moral values and our priorities, really serving as a blueprint for how we intend to live them out. It is us creating intentional guidance and practices to ensure that we're operationalizing our values into our programs, services, systems, and daily work, which includes internal services as well. This year, just to give you a little bit of a highlight, this fiscal year, what we did was we had equity managers as well as our office host multiple workshops, really applying the county's equity and empowerment lens to the budget development. I truly, truly value the work of the equity managers and really enjoy seeing them woven in as a primary resource when the budget is being done. Our budget equity tool really helps departments in 3 key areas in terms of reflecting our, reflecting the priorities of the organization, intentionally aligning with our workforce equity strategic plan. There's also collaboration, and we encourage collaboration between departments and equity managers, as well as the CBAC, which you just heard from Amada this morning. We want you to walk away with the fact that it is imperative that we prepare our budgets with equity impacts in mind, that we are able to confidently explain how we used equity to make a decision on a program or a service, followed by seeing our program offers purposely reflect an equitable approach. Next slide, please. I just want to give you, and all of these, just so you know, there are links in your presentation that you should be able to click on and actually get a copy of the tool. If any of the links don't work, just let me know and I'll make sure that that you have them. The Equity and Empowerment Lens is really a quality improvement tool used to improve planning, decision-making, and resource allocation, leading to an increase in equitable policies and programs. At its core, these principles look at reflective questions that really help us look to find the root cause of disparities, recognize those things that actually are working, change how we make decisions, and change how we do things. When we think of this component, we look at three key areas: a program level, strategic outcomes, and department level. From a program level, this includes using data to really assess racial disparities for client populations, client feedback for quality improvement, and really looking at culturally strategic specific strategies for programmatic design. And then from the strategic outcomes, we really want people to look at 3 to 5 high-level strategic outcomes from a department division perspective and determine what will be accomplished as a result of those outcomes. And then last but definitely not least, at the department level, really asking ourselves to incorporate and describe the ways that department budgets are reflecting our organizational commitment to advancing equity. While I, am always pleased to be here with you, it is my pleasure to always invite someone to join me that really takes what we talk about here in the Office of Diversity and Equity and then see it infused in a department. And so without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Sophie Wilson.
Good morning. Next slide, please. Hello, let me move this a little higher. My name is Sophie Wilson. My pronouns are she and her, and I serve as the Equity and Inclusion Manager for the Department of County Assets, also known as DCA. Next slide. I'd like to begin by providing an overview of the DCA strategic plan. My team and I developed tools and trainings to integrate equity in our budget process to align with DCA's mission, vision, and values. DCA's mission is to ensure that those who serve the community have what they need to provide excellent services. So we are the people that serve the people. We envision this through a thriving community built on information spaces and services for everyone. And our values are stewardship, equity, innovation, and collaboration. Next slide, please. And so as stewards of public funds, we recognize that the budget is a reflection of our values, priorities, vision, and our story. And we also wanted to define what an equity lens looks like when applied to a budget process. Next slide, please. And so with this in mind, we developed and designed a DCA equity matrix, and this is, I know, a lot of text, used in our department's budget prioritization process. And it was used to rank potential reductions and additions to the DCA budget. This matrix was developed by Mary Weiner, DCA Customer Engagement and Strategic Initiatives Manager, and myself, and is used by the DCA leadership team. Some of the questions were inspired by our DCA strategic plan, which you can see in these questions. And this weighted matrix is divided into 3 sections, mirroring the chair's 3 priorities for our department: safety and security, equity, and constraint impacts on other departments and non-departments. The resulting scores informed our budget decision-making at the department level. And next slide, please. And so this slide that you just saw details how we've taken, steps we've taken to integrate equity into our program offer process. And there's a lot of steps on here, but I'll explain them all. So in addition to our DCA equity matrix, I developed an equity process for program offers, specifically our Equity and Budget Reviewer program and our Equity and Budget Toolkit. So in this first step you see here, my team and I developed a training for DCA staff on how to evaluate a program offer with an equity lens. This training included an overview of the county's budget process, which was especially helpful for staff that didn't directly engage with the budget. It also included the importance of integrating equity into budget decisions and an interactive exercise used to practice our internal equity and budget toolkit. Participants who completed this training then became what we call DCA equity and budget reviewers, and this same training was also shared with our management team. In the second step, I developed a DCA equity and budget toolkit, which was inspired by what Joy just mentioned, the county's equity budget tool, and our equity and empowerment lens. It also aligned with our county and department's mission. All program authors are required to use this toolkit to draft their initial program offers, and I also provided one-on-one consultation as needed. In the third step in our program offer process, our newly trained DCA equity and budget reviewers reviewed a selected amount of DCA program offer drafts using this exact same toolkit to provide different perspectives on our budget decisions. In the fourth steps, managers actually reviewed that feedback and made edits specifically to address any opportunities or growths and how to improve our communication in our program offers. And then I also reviewed every single program offer using that exact same toolkit. In the fifth step, the DCA leadership team then reviewed all final drafts before they were shared with our Community Budget Advisory Committee, or CBAC, for additional feedback. And then finally, our budget team, who's fantastic, submitted all the program offers to the central budget. So that's a very brief outline of our program offer process, which took multiple months to complete. Next slide, please. And so this is a visual of what our DCA equity and budget toolkit looks like. And there are 11 questions total that all program offer authors are required to answer, as well as program offer reviewers and myself. Questions include, does this program offer define who's impacted by the program? Does this program offer describe how an equity lens was applied? And does this program offer align with plain language best practices? And I want to provide more detail about why this specific plain language question is part of this toolkit. Next slide, please. And so plain language is clear, to the point, and easy to understand. It's a form of accessible communication. It means that a community member can understand how our budget decisions align with our values, our priorities, and our vision. And I want to provide an example of a real-world impact this question had from our toolkit on a DCA budget decision. So equity and budget reviewers noticed that some of our program offers used industry-specific jargon or language that did not align with plain language best practices, meaning it was really confusing to understand what we were trying to communicate if you didn't work in that specific field. And so when budget and equity reviewers caught this, they provided feedback to the program offer authors, and the result was a division-wide change to refine the language for program offers in that division that year to make it more clear for folks to understand what we were trying to communicate. And so it became more accessible terminology that we still use in language for those program offers. Our DCA equity and budget resources have also been shared with the county for broader application and reference. So the DCA equity and budget tool that you just saw was shared with the Office of Diversity and Equity and was part of their annual budget equity using budget equity tool training that they lead every year. And then I also presented this toolkit as well as our equity process in our department in the countywide workforce equity strategic plan implementation meeting in December 2024. So DCA has created a process to embed equity in our budget. Our equity and budget processes are examples, once again, of our DCA values of innovation, equity, and collaboration. And in the spirit of collaboration, I would be remiss if I didn't recognize the following for their commitment and contributions to this work. So I'd like to give some thanks to DCA Director Tracy Massey and the rest of the DCA leadership team for making sure this was a requirement and is a requirement throughout our department. Our equity and budget reviewers for volunteering their time to read through countless program offers, our DCA budget team for making all of this happen, and our Community Budget Advisory Committee for providing their feedback, and finally, our DCA equity team for leading this work. And so we remain committed to utilizing our existing training programs, tools, and collaborative relationships to ensure equity is consistently integrated in our budget processes. Thank you.
Anything else from you, Joy?
No. I think the next slide is questions.
Okay, great.
Yes, the next slide is for questions.
That's great.
When I saw Commissioner Turn, I was like, I think I'm supposed to answer some questions now. Yeah, questions.
Okay, great. We'll turn it over to the board for questions. Go ahead.
just so that I understand process, this equity advising happened during the department budget process and should be reflected in the information that's presented in the chair's budget? Yes or no? Yes, it should.
Yes.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah.
We actually start, because we know DCA actually does their budgeting pretty much all year round. We used to start our budget equity trainings closer toward the end of the year. And after just that great partnership that we have with Sophie, we've backed it up. So we started around the end of August to give, even though she's probably already started already, which I recognize that, but we backed it up to August so that we could be a little bit more in alignment.
I would personally love to see more of that reflected in like the program offer descriptions, because it's very hard to tell by program offer descriptions. Other than like, in general, good language, like actual measurable things. One of the things I'd love to see, obviously not for this, well, maybe, because I'm not a fan of the key performance measures of pretty much any program offer, that it be practice to have a key performance measure related to equity that is based off of both where the program is currently and identified areas of focus so that we're holding ourselves true to those. So, I think in general, I'd love to have a conversation about what a key performance measure is and how we should set them, but I would love to have an equity key performance measure just built in so that it's really ingrained in how we think about how we do the work.
No, I appreciate that. And I think it was toward the end of last year, a group of people got together with Dr. Veronica Cano on my team to talk about just that. And I know we're supposed to reconvene before the budget process this time because we had the deep discussion, like, how do you measure equity? How is equity measured? And so she is, in the process of talking with several, which will include the equity managers, to have that conversation.
My second question is, when I think about the framework that the county uses, I assume the foundational document is the WES. Yes?
Yeah, well, yes, and the foundational document is also our equity and empowerment lens, so we use them both synonymously.
How, on a macro level, are we looking at our budget from an equity lens? And I bring this up, and Commissioner Singleton brought this up in a prior meeting. I don't think it was coordinated in any way, but there did seem to be kind of a pattern of programs that were put forward for a reduction that were heavily utilized by the LGBTQ population. And I don't think that was like everyone talked and said, what minority community are we collectively throwing under the bus? That was not, I didn't get that impression, but it clearly, weirdly happened. Which, made me wonder, do we rank our equity work by, and is that the least important, or, but how are we getting potentially your department, since you kind of have this all department lens, how do we as decision makers engage with you looking at the budget as a complete document and not at the program or department level for disproportionate impacts? I'm very concerned about layoffs disproportionately impacting employees of color or other groups because, last hired, first fired. And so I want that data when I look at things of like, this program serves what population? What is the makeup of these, obviously I don't want names, but in general of these employees? Is how will this impact our overall equity work, but also what message does it send?
Okay, I'm going to try to take each. To address the portion around the employees of color who do this work that could be getting, their jobs are not moving forward in the next fiscal year. I leave that work to Travis Brown and his team in Central HR because that's not something that we in the Office of Diversity and Equity measure. One of the things I have noticed and I have just overall is that when you have an organization at any size, a lot of times people doing the work of the community are of the community, and so they mirror the community. And when that happens and you're doing budget equity, when you're looking at whether positions should move forward or not, oftentimes if you have to cut and you know that realization, it is going to happen. That's about as much as I can answer on that piece. Then when it comes to, my overview around the budget is that's why we provide the ongoing budget equity workshops right before the budget process happens so that we can hear the questions, the concerns, the thoughts around what people are looking at. I know, Rachel Banks in the health department has done an excellent job that if something seems odd or seems off, she will, or someone from her team will reach out to me and we will have a really, well-rounded discussion. But then again, if the health department is of the community, then the impacts are going to exist. Another way that we look at it globally, I think I spoke to this a little bit last time, is not only through the workshops, but also when we are convening for the WESP implementation, we do get to hear as a collective kind of what different teams are experiencing, which then if anything kind of, stands out to us, then we make sure that the chair's office is informed. And so that's kind of how we do it today.
So we heard DCA's program offer equity process. Is that the same for every department?
No, we allow so we deliver our process the same. We're actually looking at, so we have like a 101, so to speak, for budget equity. And then we encourage every equity manager to kind of take that and do what Sophie did, which is really kind of form it and morph it for their particular department. And then if those of, either they will do their trainings and we will participate and support that, or we will continue to do our 101 training until an equity manager or a team says we would like something more. We are going to look at doing a 201 just because I like to see graduation to next steps. And so that is something we will be looking at for this next upcoming budget cycle.
Thank you. I would say it would be helpful to me to have what every department's process is outlined in this very clear same way, because I appreciate DCA and the work that you do, but it's also very different than our human-focused social service programs. And so I'm interested in how they're actually implementing the budget equity lens. And I would have to agree with Commissioner Moyer, the outcomes that are on our program offers don't reflect what you have in your equity lens tool. And so it's really difficult for me. Almost every department I have questions on who was impacted, what are the outcomes, what are the demographics of that. And so we're gonna spend a lot of time this budget cycle, I think, asking for things that if this was included or mirrored in some way in the outcomes, we wouldn't have to ask about. And I know that's not a you thing, so I'm saying this out loud
right.
For everyone, because I not only seeing reduction in disparities is a pretty low-hanging fruit for most departments who are doing our social service work. And so I don't want to wait a whole nother year for there to be outputs in here that are equity centered. I think that that can happen really quickly. And I again, I'll ask what I can during this budget cycle, but I think let's not make this a work group that goes on for a long time. Let's get it in place now so that they can actually start producing budgets and program offers next year that reflect some of this.
No, and thank you for that. And what that informs me and my team, because both myself and Terralyn Escamilla, who focuses on the equity and empowerment lens, when we come together to prepare the workshop, even though I know this is not what you're asking for today, right this moment, we can actually start looking at outcomes and start working with Dr. Cano on my team. So when we do our next round, we can actually introduce what that would look like and give some examples and be able to see if, because I don't get to dictate what someone puts in their program offer in a respective department, but we can and we can serve it up to them and see if they will appreciate that. One of the things I also would like to highlight is that we do have, when Christian talks about partnership, it really is a true partnership between our office and her office. And what her office does whenever we get prepared for the new budget cycle, her team puts together essentially a spreadsheet for us to be able to share with the departments that are going through the budget process or getting prepared for the budget process that highlights how people are building equity into their program offers. So you'll see whether this might not be the exact wording, but it's like, this one is a program offer that has equity built in well. This program offer, it's listed. This program offer has room for improvement. So that this way people can reflect on, oh, maybe I have some room to grow here, or, oh, I'm doing really well, how do I continue the journey, or, oh, we're really doing an excellent job, how do we make sure now it infuses into all of our program offers? Because what you have is, let's say a DCA probably has what, 100, I don't want to say 100 program offers, but
In the past,
70 program offers in DCA. So what I try to help people understand is saying you're going to change 70 program offers can be a big, thing to digest. And so really helping them recognize that, okay, so if you're not going to work on all 70 of your program offers, kind of do them over the course of time so that by the time you get to, let's say, year 3, you've looked at all of your program offers, all of them infuse equity, and then you can move forward accordingly. So that's also something that we recommend when we do our training as well.
Thank you. I definitely want to appreciate equity as a journey, and this journey has gotten further than it was 3 years ago, 4 years ago. So absolutely improvement. And I think the narrative around equity, a lot of people can write really nice words and have really good language, but where the rubber meets the road is how you operationalize it. And so seeing it not just in narrative, but in outputs and outcomes will be really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Commissioner, yeah.
Thank you for the presentation, and I really appreciated seeing how this plays out in a department. I love the plain language slide because I think that's a huge barrier to people accessing our budget process and what the outcomes mean. So thank you for that, and also for the matrix. I thought that's a very useful tool to have to sort of look at how the investments are being made and cuts. And I guess the benefit of going after my fellow commissioners is, so I would too also like to see how it plays out in different departments, because the question I have, and this isn't maybe for either of you, but when we have the department budgets, sometimes budgets that have, maybe this is a question for you, where there is alternative funding sources besides general fund, does that trump equitable outcomes? So you can be prioritized from a budget standpoint, or your particular program offer gets prioritized, even if from an equity standpoint, it may not score higher on sort of producing more equitable outcomes, but it has a non-general fund source. And I'm curious how that plays out. And this is maybe more a question.
That is a question I don't believe is for me, but I would say, well, no, I better not say, because Christian's looking at me, so I'll let Christian answer.
Can you tell Joy and I spend a lot of time? I think it's an important.
Oh, your mic.
I thought I turned on, sorry. I think it's an important question. I think it's going to be a case-by-case basis as we talk to the departments. I think I'm going to say that a lot today as we get into that. And then really understanding how those braided funding streams work together and what does that mean? Does it mean that we're bringing in the general fund in places where we want to address disparities because the existing funding source is really meant to be this more, broadly, generally applied kind of first come, first serve kind of funding source. So I think those questions will change depending on the funding source that we're talking about in the department and the services that we're talking about.
Thanks. Yeah, because sometimes the answer to a question about whether a program that seems to be focused on a community that we've indicated is important for us to, whether it's LGBTQ community or any other community, the answer sometimes is we cut that because it's not reimbursable by Medicaid, or it doesn't have, it's relies solely on the general fund. And so I'm just curious, is that just left to departments to make those determinations or prioritizations?
Well, I think it's part of the process. So the departments start that first analysis, bring that submitted budget. And I think the chair has been pretty clear that she's very focused on specific communities, especially addressing disparities in the community, the most vulnerable. So making those trade-offs and understanding what that looks like. And then I think there's that third round with the board when we have these work sessions to really talk about how all of that is weaving together and how that is integrated. And that's where some of those trade-offs in the general fund come from, right? Because if you're saying, well, our other funding sources don't allow us to serve this community in this way, and we know that's important and that's what they need, then that's where we have to bring those really, our least restrictive dollars, which ends up being our general fund, into those programs to really support those communities in the way that we feel is necessary. And I think it's why when we talk to the state a lot, we often talk about local control and doing the work in our community, because it might look different than it looks in a county on the coast or, a county to the south of us. And so really making those determinations and that understanding based on how we think our community needs to see the services delivered is an important aspect of these conversations.
Thank you, Christian. And Joy, thank you guys for answering those questions. I think part of it, like Commissioner Moyer, to your question about, you didn't think it was intentional. About like certain, that there may have been a lot of programs that were focused on the LGBTQIA2S+ community come forward. That some of that only does come up because it isn't intentional in any way. And it only comes up when we hear from all the departments and we kind of see what's going forward. And so that's where myself and my team and working with the COO's office are really having those conversations about what do these things look like and what are the impacts holistically going to be, based on what the departments separately are bringing forward. So that's part of it. But I will say a really important part of this of the work is going to happen here in this room as we are having our conversations and maybe reflecting on things or seeing things that weren't caught before. I appreciate the conversation, especially where we are right now with, the federal climate and what's happening there with some, and the constraints around those dollars. We've been thinking about that. So that will, I think, be coming forward with this work as well. One thing I want to add, and Christian, correct me if I'm wrong, each of the departments as part of their budget presentation templates do speak to equity, the equity decision-making, the equity process that they use. So the board is going to hear that from each of the departments when they come and present to us. So I'm hearing the ask to have it maybe written out a little more, clearly for each departments, but that is something that they will plan to address as they come before the board.
I think yes, and the process outline there is so clean that I'd rather not have a million slides about how the equity and budget process worked. Like if it can be really clean, if that's in their presentation, but that doesn't speak to the outcomes and the program offers. So it's a both and for future work.
Yeah, the program offers is something that Christian knows is we are finally getting there though. The first year was mission, vision, values. This year is the strategic plan. And then next year is how the budget and the program offers are going to roll up to the strategic plans and the kind of the true key performance indicators for that. So we're kind of like just in the last days of using this system and really having some broader organization-wide and department things that, because I think the challenge that we have is that, you know, when the program offers were initially set up for a different type of program budgeting process that was made by several chairs ago, and they still exist, but that way of budgeting overall doesn't exist anymore at the county. So now what we need to do is align our program offers with the way that we are doing our budget at the county and the things that we're considering.
And Commissioner Singleton, I have a note here that says send Sophie's slide out to all the other departments. Have them be clear about the steps.
Yeah, or even if it's supportive material, like a supportive material that's not necessarily in the presentation. Okay, thank you all very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
All right. Well, just appreciate that work, and thank you, Sophie. What you guys are doing in DCA is fantastic, so appreciate that. Okay, great. Now we get to the budget kickoff and overview. Woohoo!
Great.
And Jeff, you came up early. I was like going to say now it's time for the Christian and Jeff show, but we've kind of had that a little bit. All right. So this is great. I will turn it over to you to really dig into the nuts and bolts and all the good parts of our budget.
Great. I think you see our slide deck's like 120 slides, so we'll be here all day. I'm just joking. I'm going to move pretty quickly through a lot of these slides. These are really top-line numbers. We're really trying to daylight kind of, you know, how you can think about the budget, how you can organize questions, identify departments or funds that are contributing to the overall budget in kind of big ways in certain areas. As I'm advertising on my new favorite shirt, we are working on supplemental data sets for everyone. I've heard from you, you know, I try to sneak into your offices, make the rounds, think about the things that you're gonna need. There's also a bunch of supplemental data sets at the end of our presentation. So where's all the video lottery budgeted? Where did we backfill supportive housing services dollars based on the reductions that the Homeless Services Department needed to take? Where's all the one-time only money located? We even put in there every year, we're trying to be more anticipatory. Where do we invest our equity dollars in departments? What's positions? What does that look like? What do those investments look like? So really just trying to get you all there without you having to ask me that question. And I still encourage you to ask me those questions. There are 5 people in the budget office watching this right now, all waiting to take down all these questions. It's like a timeline operator, you know, standing by. I know that dates me, which is challenging. It just really hurts my heart that I'm dating myself like that. Also, you are probably going to have questions about department-specific things. I will not be able to answer those, but we will start to get that on the record. So as the departments are coming up in their work sessions, they can really see the types of things that you're going to be interested in talking about and maybe adjust some of their slides in the interim before that. Also, I do have a script for this presentation. It's just a lot, and so there's just no way that I could memorize it all. I'm just not that good. I know. And Jeff will interrupt me. Sometimes I like to try to go off script, and then I like miss the general point that I was trying to make on a slide, so he'll nudge me or just break in. So let's get started here again with my favorite graphic. It's colorful, it's exciting, it shows progress. That's right, we've now moved our little triangle over. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this slide. Just as a reminder, we are halfway done according to this graphic, but really we're heading into like these really important conversations about the budget. I just also want to remind us that the chair's budget is kind of step one in releasing that balanced budget, starting that public conversation, but it's not the end of our process, and things will change over this time frame. And
we are not in a resource-rich environment. We are in a resource-constrained environment, so these conversations are going to be challenging. They're also going to be challenging for our neighbors across the river, the Portland Public School District, all of our partners who we really, truly, our services are integrated with a lot of their work, and trying to maintain those partnerships, outcomes, and make sure that we're delivering for our community are going to be part of I think, the fabric of these conversations that we're going to have over the next 7 weeks. So if we can go to the next slide, please.
Can I ask a quick question, just process-wise? Do you want us to wait for the 120 slides to be done?
There's not.
Or should we wait to the very end and then?
And if there's like a clarifying question, feel free to ask that, but I just think that we want to make sure we get through everything. So.
Yeah, because we're going to present on a breadth of things, so the question that you have right now might not be the most important one once we get through some of these slides, and I do know that we're hitting some time constraints, so I will try to be very, very fast. Again, this is just a reminder of all of our budget work sessions that we're going to have. It lays out the next 7 weeks. We already have one change to the schedule. We're going to move the general fund forecast up a bit to the end of May. We had it scheduled at the beginning of June, and then when I relooked at the calendar, that didn't really make a lot of sense. And so, but we will send you updates and let you know when those changes are made. And then every once in a while, we do have an emergency with the department or department director, and we have to shift something. But again, I did hear that you all downloaded the Google Calendar. When I was meeting with your teams, I said, turn it pink. So maybe you have a pink calendar on your calendar. So that's very exciting. If we can go to the next slide, please. Oh, yours is green. I will come up to your office and find it for you. Just as a reminder too, it's a really important part of the budget process is our public engagement. We kind of do public engagement in the beginning of the process. So the chair held town halls, the budget survey, that level of engagement. And then we also do kind of more formal engagement with the board. That's really the difference between a hearing and a work session. So a hearing is when you all are hearing from the community and they're able to testify, give you feedback on the budget. The budget work sessions that we're going to have, those are not an opportunity for the public to provide testimony. I hope they're listening. I hope they're, able to get access to that information. We have 3 night hearings with the public, and then also there's 3 other hearings that are officially public hearings. So when we approve the budget on May 8th, those are all noticed to the public. The public can come and testify. The Tax Supervising Conservation Commission hearing is a public hearing where people can come and testify. Budget adoption is a hearing where we'll take testimony. And then also along the way, we do have board meetings. So we will have your regular board meetings where people can come and testify on non-agenda items. And so there's also an opportunity for the community to come and testify at that time as well. So if we can go to the next slide, please. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because we did get to have a work session about board deliberation, but this is just a reminder that during any work session, the board can propose an amendment. I have a really low-tech solution for us, which is this whiteboard behind you. I really like it. You see that I'm capturing the information that you're presenting. I also love Wheel of Fortune. It is my, I really hope when I retire that I make it onto the show. And so I see it as my Vanna White opportunity to really get up there, and my handwriting is terrible. So, and spelling is getting worse as I get older. You can also propose a budget note, request a briefing, request more information as we've talked about. We will capture that as well. And then we'll make sure that we're scheduling, preparing, and getting everything moving for this very fast and exciting 7 weeks that we have. We can go to the next slide, please. Budget adoption, as a reminder, is more than just the budget and budget amendments. We have to levy property taxes. Every year I try to skip that step, and Jeff is like, how are we going to pay for all of this? And I'm like, ooh, we should not skip that step. So we'll bring the financial and budget policies, which Eric Ariano has been we've been meeting with y'all and talking about. We have the investment policy, we have a fund resolution, we have the salary compensation resolution, the fee schedule. I'm sharing last year's packet with your chiefs just so that you can get a sense of what this looks like.
If we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, this is a lot of words, but basically what we want to start making a distinction about when we talk about the budget is total budget versus operating budget. The budget is big and complicated. It currently sits at $4 billion, but we want to try to recognize that not all of that $4 billion results in operations or services in the community. So the total budget is our legal budget. We follow Oregon budget law. We don't want to get sideways with Oregon budget law. And we're required in Oregon budget law to report at that level. This is a meaning it includes all the resources that we know about, and it balances. We will always continue to report at this level, but this includes our unappropriated balances, which are essentially our reserves and things that we don't spend in any given fiscal year, and we don't want to spend because that means we're in some set of like pretty severe emergency. It includes all of our contingencies in all of our funds. It includes cash transfers, which is essentially us budgeting to send money from one department and one fund to another fund. So there's a lot of double counting that happens there. And then we are usually using those for capital funds when we're transferring for the capital funds. In contrast, our operating budget excludes all of those things. And so it really says to us, what can we spend on services in our community and what is available to us? Because nothing in budget is ever simple, every time the chair asks me a question, I'm like, oh, it's not that simple. There's still some level of double counting in the operating budgets, but again, this is really related to mostly the Department of County Assets. So when facilities is planning to do work for a department, the department budgets for it, and then we rebudget it over here in DCA, and that is true of our capital budgets as well. Going forward in this presentation, when we talk about revenues or total revenues available, we're going to talk about the total budget. And then when we talk about expenditures, we're going to talk about the operating budget. And we're going to try to be really clear about that. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Great. And when you look at our budget in volume 2, you really see that all of our tables, we try to show you the operating budget and then show you the total budget so you can see those categories of what's being excluded when we talk about operating budget. This is just a nice little graphic that I borrowed from the city of Portland, and it's just a reminder that the budget has to be balanced. So currently the chair's proposed budget is balanced. We are not the federal government. We cannot run a deficit. Sorry. And so right now the chair's budget is balanced. As we move through the process, if you all are having a discussion about funding something in a different way, we either have to find revenue to support that change in that program, or we have to reassign expenditures that are currently allocated in the budget to be able to fund that. So just, I will continue to say that. I will continue to say we're working towards a balanced budget. One day I'll create a budget bingo card and then you all will win pretty quickly. If we can go to the next slide, please. So budget by the numbers, it's a budget slide. As I said, the total budget is $4 billion. This is an increase of $18 million, which I can tell you is essentially having a flat or a reduction year budget. I think a couple years ago when we started the voter initiatives, that number was like $700 million when we had American Rescue Plan and numbers. These are back to my early days of budgeting of what we used to see when we were talking about kind of the county budget. It's a 0.5% increase. It funds 5,866 FTE, which is a decrease of just over 100 FTE. Remember, that's a net number, so everything we're talking about here is net numbers. It funds $62.3 million in one-time only funds. That number is different than the number we've been talking to you about. We'll get into that in a little while. There's a bunch of contingencies and reserves in there that inflate that number.
Does that $62.3 million include anticipated unspent revenues that will be swept, or is that not yet accounted for?
That includes, so we always do a 2-year look back, so that is including fiscal year 2024 underspending that is documented. That has been our practice. We could really get sideways with that number if we try to make anticipations. Also, there's some policy implications. If people, if you all say we want to ensure that we have this one-time only money available, and then a department feels constrained and they're providing services in the given fiscal year, you can see how that might change their behavior. And so we've really said a best practice for us today, at least, is that we're looking 2 years back to really, that's the final number. That is the ending balance. And that we're allocating going forward based on what we think departments need to deliver services. If that changes or if that's different, we need to have that conversation during the budget process.
Thank you.
Sorry, Christian, is that the same for SHS?
That is, they get to hold on to their ending balance, so it doesn't become part of the kind of the general fund. What I'm referring to is just the general fund here.
Thank you.
And then, so you'll see a different number for the Homeless Services Department. It's really hard for us who started that department to have it renamed.
It's really hard.
And then we do have $102 million in our reserves and unearmarked contingencies, and you'll see that that follows our best practice of what that funding is. So we can go to the next slide, please. So brightly colored charts. So really this is looking at our, sorry, I need to move on to the actual notes for this slide. So this is our $4 billion when we were talking about revenues. And as you can see there, our beginning working capital is really our biggest source of revenue. In the past, that hasn't been true, but what you're seeing there is you're seeing the library GEO bond balance in that. That's at about $133 million. That balance is going down because we're actually building libraries, which is really exciting, and we would expect that to be happening. You're also seeing, this is a decrease from last year because the supportive housing services measure, beginning working capital that we had been kind of accumulating over the last couple of years. We're really ramping up those services, those investments, so that balance is going down. And this then is offset by the dedicated savings in the Preschool for All Fund, which we'll talk about in a minute. The second largest, when we're thinking all funds, which is really important, our second largest investment is taxes. This is essentially almost all the taxes that are in the general fund that we talk about pretty extensively when we have the general fund forecast. This is property taxes, this is the business income tax, and the motor vehicle rental tax, and then also the addition of the Preschool for All tax as well. So it's not everything that's in the general fund, but it's primarily made up of general fund taxes. Intergovernmental revenues is our third largest funding source, and this is really where we're getting funding from the state, from the federal government through the state, any partnerships that we have where other jurisdictions are sending us funding. You can see that it's decreasing year over year. You can't see it in this slide, but this is mostly based on the adjustment to the SHS forecast, because we know that ongoing revenue source is going down. And then also we had a one-time only transfer to the Burnside Bridge Fund of $22 million last year that we don't expect to continue going forward. The other category mainly includes internal services, the risk fund, the capital improvement funds, and the resources in those funds. So it is a much smaller amount. We can go to the next slide, please.
Just a quick question. Are fees included in the taxes? Is that the same bucket?
Fees are not included in the taxes. They are in.
Oh, here they are.
Yeah, they're a tiny bubble up there. Up to the, it's the dark yellow color, I would call that, maybe. Mustard, thank you. And that's fees, permits, and charges, which is a little bit more broad. When we talk about the fee schedule, we're really just talking about those things that we charge people for, and you'll see that number is much, much smaller. It's just not a big fabric of the work that we do and how we recover funding for services. So if we can go to the next slide, we're going to talk about the operating expenses. And then we're going to get this down even farther. So that's $3 billion. And that's where we're talking about the difference between 4 and 3. So really, when we look at all funds, when we look at operating expenses, professional services and contractual services are our largest portion of the budget. You'll see another slide when we get to the general fund where that shifts, where those investments shift. But this is when we're thinking about everything. And a lot of the work that we do, especially through state funding, think about in behavioral health, in mental health, in addictions treatment. The work that we do in supportive housing services is often done through contracted partnerships. And so that's why you see that bubble being much larger when we look at all funds. Let's see, I have a lot of talking points here, but I think when we think about this, this is down. The contractual services is down year over year by about $114 million. The majority of that decrease is the loss of the Metro SHS funding, which we were expecting and we're working towards figuring out as part of this budget process. There was also a technical change in Preschool for All where they switched ledger accounts, so it's had an impact on what this looks like. We can definitely get you that information. We also have some other places where we pass through funding. So in the Department of Community Services, they get funding from the state that we then have these intergovernmental working agreements with the city of Portland and the East County cities where we pass through dollars. That's about $38 million that you see in there. And so there's a lot that make up these numbers. When the departments come, they'll be able to talk about more specifics in this area. So if we can go to the next slide, please. One of the things as I hear a lot is, well, why are you cutting? Because your budget is increasing year over year, which is true. But I think as we think back to the general fund forecast and we think about revenue increases in relationship to our expenditure increases, you can see here, these are kind of our 3 significant operating funds that we're running programs and services out of. And you can see in the general fund, that increase is 3%. And that's everything in the general fund. So that's fees, and when Jeff comes and talks, we're really talking about kind of those big revenue sources. 3% does not cover the pace at what our expenditures are increasing by. You can see in the federal state fund, that's increasing by 2.1%. Again, that's not gonna cover our costs in that meaningful way to be able to do everything that we did last year, this year. And then in the supportive housing services fund, we're seeing a pretty significant decrease. And so just wanted to daylight that. So when you're thinking about that, yeah, when we total up the entire budget and you have the capital funds and you have all that stuff, we're seeing that slight increase. $18 million is not a lot, even countywide. But then when we're looking at these more dedicated funds for services, you're seeing really that kind of flat to no growth in those areas. We anticipate that's probably going to be the conversation we're having with you over the next few years. We can go to the next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about what we spend our resources on. This is actually a chart we've been putting together for a long time to just detail out when that money goes into the budget and it gets spent, what are the primary areas that it's getting spent on. You can see that personnel becomes a higher proportion of our spend, and that's because we changed this slide to make sure that all the capital, which oftentimes is spending on personnel or contracted services, actually shows up in that capital line. If not, it can be really confusing. So if it's in a capital fund, it might be a personnel expense or professional services, but we want to make sure that it shows up here in relation to the other bubble charts that you saw earlier. And so then that personnel services is excluding capital investments.
So when you say personnel services, those are internal to the county?
Correct. Yeah. So any of the costs related to having staff and FTE. If we can go to the next slide, please. So then let's look at our operating expenses by department, by kind of major fund. Again, I'm not going to get too detailed in this, but just to give you a sense of when we look at it this way, it really looks like the Department of County Assets budget is one of our biggest budgets. And I think it's just really important that we see that, because if we were just asked to produce math without any evaluation, this would be the kind of chart that we would present to you. But as you can see, the Library Capital Construction GEO Bond Fund is a very significant portion of their budget. And then in that orange, which is another very significant portion of their budget, you're gonna see all of the capital funds that they have. That is also true for community services when they have the Willamette River Bridge Fund and the transportation funds. So if we go to the next slide and we exclude capital, you can start to see that shift of investment changes. So the health department is still leading the way.
They are big and they run a lot of our services and have a lot of funding in them. Plus, we run the federally qualified health centers, which is a huge component. I think it's nearly $220 million of the health department's budget. So that is a significant investment there. So that you can see that now all of a sudden the Department of County Assets is really falling towards that end. I do want to point out that county management and non-D also look really big in relation. That's because in county management, we have the risk fund, which we've talked about in the past, and they will talk to you about more, which I think is close to $190 million. And then in non-D, my favorite department, we pay all the debt service payments out of non-D. Kind of all that corporate functioning accounting stuff is located in non-D that we're taking care of. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Just wanted to give us a little update on the voter initiatives. This is presenting the 5-year history of the voter initiatives. You can see they're all doing different things and going in different directions, and that's to be expected. You can see that the library capital construction bond is going down. Again, as buildings go up, the fund goes down because we've spent it to build those buildings, which I think is a really good story and very exciting for our community. You can see that a preschool for all there, that is on that trajectory of up today, but we all know that dedicated savings is going towards expenses when we start to incur the program at kind of top, the words are, thank you, Commissioner. And also that we see those deficits, right, when we need to balance expenditures against revenues. And so we anticipate that that's going to start next year and beyond in fiscal year 2027. And then the Metro Supportive Housing Services, this is not a surprise to any of you. We were just here a couple weeks ago making reductions in the current year. And so those are also being reflected in the out years as we think about that. That voter initiative. So just wanted to put those numbers out in front of you all. So let's talk a little bit about the general fund on the next slide. So our general fund revenue is about $897 million. Again, that's everything that's in the fund, not everything that is available to spend on operations. No surprise that taxes are the majority of that at about 70%. Commissioner, when we think about fees and permits, again, that mustard circle there, that's where we get down to that much smaller number, just under $18 million that we'll talk about with you next week. And then we have some beginning working capital and other investments there that happy to give you more breakdown on what comprises those numbers if you need them. If we can go to the next slide, please. So then when we think about what do we have available to spend on services, this is about $783 million. And now you're seeing where personnel makes up a much more significant portion of that spend. That's also because we know that a large portion of the general fund, almost 50%, is spent on public safety. Public safety is primarily done through FTE that we employ and all of the associated, so that would include overtime, on-call, temp. Any of those lines related to personnel are showing up in that bubble. If we can go to the...
Can you define materials and supplies?
Sure. I'm going to give you a really basic definition, but this really is anything that departments are buying to support the program. So if we buy paper, when the print shop charges me for the budgets, if they're having to go out and buy pens and paper, and I mean, there's a whole range. I'm thinking of my office, which is super boring, but I can imagine in offices that are doing outreach and doing those types of things, that supplies line might look a lot more interesting.
And is there a way to get details on that? Because it varies wildly. And so I'm trying to wrap my head around what that is.
Sure, absolutely. If we can go to the next slide, please. So this is just taking a look at our general fund expenditures by department. We want to make sure that we're giving you kind of these breakdowns. One of the things we started doing a couple years ago is really identifying how much in the budget is one-time only funding, how much of the budget is ongoing. This chart, I do want to note that we had the ARP interest as part of our one-time only dollars. I am assured by our CFO that we could spend those in any way that we want to, so we treated them as part of the general fund calculation. The only thing we're not allowed to do is budget them in the general fund. So there's two component pieces. We're just at about, I think, $2.4 million, $2.5 million in ARP interest. Half or just under $1 million of that is supporting the sheriff's office, HR expansion. So that is listed as one time only, and then the rest is being budgeted in the Department of County Human Services in this one-time investment for the SUN Family Resource Navigators. And so we just had to pick two places. The sheriff's office was already using ARP interest, so they already had all the accounting structure behind that. And then County Human Services also has a robust accounting structure related to American Rescue Plan. So we just chose those two. It doesn't signify anything beyond that they're still using one-time only dollars for those programs. When we look at this, the general fund by department, what you really start to see here is that the sheriff's office comprises 25% of the general fund budget. That's kind of traditionally held, and we can look at the public safety investments versus the other service area investments. And then you start to see that the health department also has a pretty significant component at about 19% of the general fund. And then our smallest department is county assets for all the reasons that we talked about earlier. So if we can go to the next slide, please.
Just to make sure to understand, you said again in this upcoming budget year, the one-time only ARPA interest is going to go to the sheriff's office HR?
50% of, so the HR investment, 50% of it is ongoing, and then 50% of it is one-time only.
Is that being treated as a serial ongoing?
I think that's work that's being done with the sheriff's office. They have a new HR director. They're really working hard at determining what that level is going to look like as they think about all the retirements that are coming. I think every time you see a Wednesday Wire, you see that most of those retirements are in the sheriff's office, and really assessing what they're going to need going forward in HR services and backgrounding. So I think that partnership is continuing, and as they move through that process, I think they're going to be working with the chair's office very closely to figure out what that need is going to be going into fiscal year 2027.
Yeah, our hope with them working with the sheriff's with the sheriff's office is that we fill these positions. We actually don't have the big bumps and retirements for those folks who were hired, 20, 25 years ago, and we get to a more consistent and like smoother, HR process and hiring process for the sheriff's office.
But just to clarify, the HR people, they're not limited duration.
You'd have to ask the sheriff's office. I don't believe they're budgeted as limited duration but positions. I believe they are budgeted as FTE, so we can confirm that. Actually, I know they are budgeted as FTE because they're one of the departments where we saw increases in FTE.
Right, so they're not really one-time.
They are funded with one-time only money.
But not one-time only positions.
I think it'll depend.
I'm just saying, they're hired as an FTE, not a limited duration or a contract.
That's correct, right. Yes. So this is just, again, another visualization. Wow, I really can't say that word, can I? Of what our general fund investments have looked like over time. In the public safety area, we've included the standard departments that you would think of. We're also including, there's a pretty significant budget in non-D for the state courts. By mandate, we need to pay for that. That is a public safety function. And then we have the local public safety coordinating council and corrections health. So we're kind of, taking that data that you traditionally see in other departments and assigning it to public safety. One of the things that you can see is that it's showing spending as a percent. And so, in fiscal years 23 and 24, you can see that
when the board was allocating surpluses, and a lot of that investment went into county human services, the health department, it's changing the percentages, but that doesn't mean that we cut public safety. It just means the percentage of investment was shifted in those fiscal years. So I want to be really clear about that, that any of these, this is a percentage allocation of total general fund. It doesn't necessarily indicate there were reductions in those areas in any given fiscal year.
I'm curious about corrections health being included in public safety versus health and human services, since that's a health department function. How much?
It's a health department. I want to say it's about $36 million, but we'll need to get back to you on the specific number because I could be really wrong about that. But I think it's in the 30.
You can get back to me.
Yeah. So, and so, you know, that has been a discussion in the past, but if we did not have a correction system, you know, that is there to serve the correction system, not to serve the health in, you know, health and human services out in the community. And so we can talk about that. We could make that shift. We're trying to be really like discreet about when we think about public safety investments versus health and human service investments. There's also, we know community justice really does run a lot of programs that probably lean more towards, especially around our youth, and making sure that our youth aren't going deeper into the public safety system. That might feel a little bit more like social services and a little less like public safety. It's really hard to get that all at a finite level. This is just to give you more of a general sense of how we're investing the general fund. So now I'm going to stop talking. This is my break, and I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, and we are going to talk about general fund contingencies and reserves first.
Thank you, Christian. For the record, I'm Jeff Renfro from the Budget Office. I use he, him pronouns. If we could go to the next slide, please. I'm also going to try to go fast, but I do want to pause and just make sure we talk about the importance of our reserves, especially in light of the economic uncertainty right now. So the chair's proposed budget fully funds the reserves at the board policy level of 12% of our corporate revenues. That's $77.8 million. As a reminder, GFOA best practice recommends 15%, and past boards have said it is our goal to get there eventually. We're kind of trying to increase by 1% at a time as we have one time only available to do that. I have heard other jurisdictions in this time of budget constraints talking about budgeting reserves to offset potential cuts. I'll say that especially now, especially this year, our reserves are really important. As we're thinking about the amount of economic uncertainty, it is possible that as we get into the fall and in the winter, we will be in a different economic situation. So really what fully funding our reserves does is it buys us time. So if we get into the next fiscal year and we think that the BIT isn't going to deliver the level of revenue that we're expecting, we can use those reserves to offset some of those cuts. And then anything we need, any changes we need to make, we can push that into our normal budget process and do it in a more thoughtful way with better information and better data. Yes, Commissioner.
Yeah, I had a question, and it somewhat involves Eric. In my conversation about reserves and the 12% with the goal of 15, that was also incredibly important to maintaining our bond rating. Knowing that to be true and knowing that that is quite important to us in order to be able to borrow at the best rates, to what degree can we actually tap into the 12% before it impacts our bond rating? And should that be a consideration in setting, or at least a conversation about setting more aside, because we can really only tap to a certain amount before it would hurt our bond rating?
And we do have a discussion of our financial and budget policies next week. So I think bringing that conversation back, I would say Eric might have a limit number, and so we'll bring that back in that conversation. Our policies do say if you use the contingencies and reserves in any fiscal year, next year, that's the first thing that you refill. So this is not ongoing funding that we're putting into the budget every year. This is one-time only money that we're kind of topping off if our revenues are exceeding kind of what that threshold 12% is. So we would then come to you and say there's
X amount of one-time only money, but we're taking off the top, filling up our reserves in any given fiscal year. So that's part of our policies. So they would see that policy also as part of that conversation if we did have to use those reserves.
Yeah, I think really the key when it comes to the bond rating agencies is making sure that we've established reasonable policies and that you all are following those policies. And then if we do use them, we have a good reason to do it. And then we also have like a really clear plan that we're committed to sticking to about getting back in alignment with our policies. General fund contingency includes $23.1 million. That's a regular contingency of $2 million plus the BIT reserve of $21.1 million. The distinction between the general fund reserve and the BIT reserve and why one is budgeted and unappropriated and the other is budgeted as contingency is we really intentionally call the BIT reserve a reserve. So our hope is that we don't have to spend it. But by budgeting it in contingency, it is available for you all to actually allocate. The reserve is just there to offset revenue losses, but if we had some sort of emergency, you could take that BIT reserve and reallocate it to fund programs. And then general fund contingency set-asides, we have $1.7 million of additional contingency for uncertainty. So that's us thinking like maybe we need even a little bit more next year to set aside. There is $1.2 million of one-time only in contingency to potentially fund a flex storm. And then there's an ongoing Local 88 market study that's still in progress, but it's almost done, and we feel like we have a pretty good sense of where it's going to end up. There's just a couple of JCNs that still need to be decided. So we put, JCN is a job class, so thank you. We set aside $600,000 of ongoing to cover that. So if that all completes before we adopt the budget, we'll come back with an amendment to push it out. If not, we'll come back with a bud mod after adoption. If we want to go to the next slide, please.
Sorry that I constantly compare this to the state process. The previous slide, the general fund contingency set-asides. Would one interpret that, and I probably have to ask the chair, is that the same as a special purpose appropriation where we're holding it, you don't give it to the department, but it's there for a purpose?
Yeah, it's the board is saying, we're going to put this money aside with an eye on this. So, you know, it's still going to take a budget modification to move that money over. We've done that recently, but yes, it's similar to that.
Then what is a flex storm?
So that is, it's for if in case the population of our jail increases to the extent that we would need to open another dorm. It's $1.2 million set aside in my budget for that of one-time only dollars.
And I do expect during this process that both of those earmarks will have budget notes related to them that will really define what the process would look like for accessing that funding and what the criteria are related to it. It's just we don't do budget notes in the chair's budget because that would be really weird. So, so those will have more definition.
No, it's just through this part of the process, yeah.
If we want to go to the next slide, please, Deja. Thank you. So this table is our attempt to make a really simple table that describes something really complicated. And obviously, the budget process happens kind of over time, but parts of this process are kind of all happening at once. A decision will be made that may like recontextualize the way we thought about something in the past. So we're trying to, in a simple way as possible, describe how we balance the budget this year. So at the top, we'll describe our budget gap, which was the $15.5 million deficit from the March forecast. And then through the chair's decision-making process, she identified almost $15 million of additional programmatic needs that she felt like she needed to fund in her budget. Big chunk of that is homeless service programming that had previously been funded with SHS. It's being backfilled by the general fund. So when you put those two together, that's a $30.5 million budget gap. To close that, the biggest portion of it was programmatic reductions of $25.7 million. And then $2.1 million of revenue changes, the biggest of which is restaurant inspection fees. So the chair's budget assumes that those restaurant inspection fee rates are increased. And what this does is it takes us back to our pre-pandemic policy of having the restaurant inspection program be self-funded, more or less. So since the beginning of the pandemic, we've been using general fund to subsidize the ongoing level of restaurant inspection fee work. We have $2.2 million of reallocations. 1.6 million of that was HB 4002 money that had been set aside on an ongoing basis in the current year budget. So based on some other funding we got and other decisions that were made, we felt like we could release that to reallocate to other work. There was also $520,000 of public campaign finance contingency in the current year. Because that program is cut, we released that to be reallocated as well. And then that last line, the $534,000, just a whole bunch of tiny adjustments related to department submittals that happened during the process, which gets us to $30.5 million of actions to offset that budget gap.
So just a clarification, where did the HB 4002 money get reallocated to?
There's not necessarily a direct
back
connection.
into the general fund?
Back into the general fund.
And same thing with the public campaign finance. So it was a contingency and now it's been just moved back into the general fund?
It was budgeted as contingency in the current year, but we counted it as ongoing. So it was there sort of as a plug in our forecast on an ongoing basis.
So that's ongoing dollars that got moved back into the general fund.
And both of them were general fund dollars.
Yeah.
The HB 4002 was none of them, that was money from the state. It was general fund dollars, county general fund dollars that had been set aside.
And Commissioner, there is one direct tie with the 4002 funding. There's a program offer, I can get you all, it's in the director's office in the health department, that is both an expansion of deflection outreach services and staffing that are going to ensure that the sobering center, the project management for the sobering center for the new permanent facility, that then I think the expectation is that that funding becomes in support of the sobering center going forward when we know what those operations, that was just under $1 million.
We can go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to cover a bunch of different ways of looking at FTE change. I'll just reiterate what Christian said. I'm going to hit some high-level explanations for it, but this is really to help you kind of think of questions to ask the departments when they come in, or think of questions you want to ask us to have the departments put together before the presentations. So to start with, we wanted to give you some historic context. So this is a reduction year. But when we look back to pre-pandemic, so we look back to fiscal year 2019 adopted, we're actually up almost 700 FTE compared to where we were there. We'll kind of slice and dice that a bunch of different ways, but that's a 13.3% increase above our pre-pandemic level. Go to the next slide, please. And then we always like to break out our FTE by general fund and other funds. So before fiscal year 2023, they were roughly equal. But then the big change that happened in fiscal year 2023 is ICS's budget was moved from the general fund to its own enterprise fund, so that popped out there. DCHS had a pretty significant increase in state funding that was added in mid-2022 that was then incorporated into the 23 adopted budget. And then also the 3 new voter initiatives show up around there as well.
But can you clarify which would show up? Like Preschool for All would show up under general fund or other fund?
Other funds. Other fund.
Other fund. Yeah. Same with SHS?
Yes.
Got it. Thank you.
If we go to the next slide, please.
So this is maybe the spreadsheet that you've already created. You're not thinking about it. But can we get the spreadsheet of all the net increases of the, not net increases, all the added FTE, new FTE, and all the reduced FTEs that give us the net reduction?
The answer is maybe. And the reason why is that the departments do a lot of work that when they put their positions in, sometimes they're not identified as new. So they're doing a lot of work when they create their submitted budget as the experts in their areas to say, maybe I don't need position A, but I really need position B. Essentially, that would be a different position. And you might think about it as new, but they're really saying, I need to do the work differently. And so
when we see new, sometimes it's not truly a new to
Yeah,
the
I guess I'll
program.
clarify. So things that are just added. So if there were 2 FTEs and there's a third one, like you could reprogram the 2 and I wouldn't count those as new, but if there's a third one added, that would be a new. So because last year we had a net reduction, but there actually, well, no, there was an add, but it was a much larger add, and then you had some reductions. So just so we can see sort of where things have been added and where things have been subtracted, because just the net reduction can be misleading.
Correct. We'll probably do B+ work on that, because also we have departments that then, as they were thinking about how to meet some of their general fund target allocations, maybe took 2 programs and maybe push them together. So my year-over-year comparison is not going to be able to point me to the area to find that, but I think we'll get you as close as possible to that. And then as the departments, as you're having that conversation about individual level program offers, you might see some of that pop out as well. So we'll start there and work back and get you B+ A- work.
Never mind, I'm not going to ask about your grading methods.
So this next slide, we're still doing our pre-pandemic to the current proposed budget comparison. So you'll see that our Health and Human Services departments have really been the bulk of the FTE increases. And then really the Department of Community Justice is the only department that's experienced significant declines in FTE since this period. That's primarily due to reductions in SB 1145 funding, and then loss in FTE as a result of Washington County's withdrawal from the juvenile detention bed IGA. We want to go to the next slide, please. So this is looking at FTE comparisons by department from the current year adopted to the 26 proposed. So I'll walk through just a couple of the big changes here. The health department is by far the biggest decrease. There's the elimination of 14 FTE of health-specific ARP funds. Fed state funds saw a net decrease of 22 FTE. There were 41 FTE decreased in the general fund, including administrative positions, nurse-family partnerships, school-based mental health. And then that's being offset by the FQHC fund, our clinical fund, had a net increase of 31 FTE. DCJ had a decline of 18 FTE from the elimination of the Juvenile Behavioral Rehabilitation Assessment and Evaluation Program, which was closed due to the Washington County withdrawal that I just mentioned. District Attorney's Office has a decline of 13 FTE, which includes 5.3 FTE of deputy district attorneys. This is a result of losing SHS funding, general fund constraint, and then also service contract reductions from outside partners. And then the increase in the Sheriff's Office is mainly from their human resources expansion that we already discussed.
But we have no calculation of the impacts on FTE and all of our provider contracts. This is just internal county. So there's likely bigger impacts into the number of folks out there doing the work.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Jeff, I'm wondering, after the meeting, could you send like for example, your notes for this particular slide, the things that you just said, like what caused that, just so that we have that all?
Yeah, we can do that. And then we're also, we're going to bury you in information in the near future here as well, but we can share the notes as well. Yeah.
The question is, do you want my bad jokes in the, because they're all in the script here.
If we could go to the next slide, please. So this is looking at the breakdown of FTE by represented and non-represented. It's been fairly stable over time. The non-rep has hovered around 16 or 17%, whereas represented has been around 83 to 82% of our total workforce. Just as a reminder, our non-represented category includes more than management. So a great example is the budget office. Everyone in the central budget office is non-rep, and it's because we work in bargaining. The same thing applies to a lot of our HR staff around the county. They're considered non-rep even if they're not managing people. If we go to the next slide, please. This looks at FTE in the proposed budget by labor group. I think the big takeaway from this one is that Local 88 is 64% of our total FTE. If we want to go to the next slide, please. So then this is looking at year-over-year FTE change by labor group. So you'll see at the bottom, Local 88 has by far the biggest decline in absolute terms, but it's 1.8% of their total FTE. When we look above that to juvenile custody, which is a subgroup of Local 88, there's a 12% reduction in FTE, which is 24% of the total. And then the O&A reductions are primarily due to eliminations in the Nurse Family Partnership Program in both the general fund and in other funds. If we want to go to the next slide, please. Then this goes back to our pre-pandemic to proposed budget comparison we've been doing. So since pre-pandemic, Local 88 remains up 14.9% at almost 500 FTE added, and then non-rep is also up 27.2 or a little over 220 FTE.
I have a question. Within the non-represented, what percentage is management and what percentage is not eligible? Like confidential employee?
I think we'll have to follow up.
Yeah, we can get you that information.
Just along the same slides, are you counting something as an FTE add if it was converted from one-time only to ongoing?
That would be captured here. So that's why we wanted to get
That would be
both.
what?
So we're going from 2019 to 2026 of actual FTE in the budget. So if during the time, like across COVID, when we were using American Rescue Plan dollars, we had a lot of limited duration assignments, as some of that work has transferred into kind of the core work that we're doing, now being paid for with other funds. That's why we wanted to bookend that so that you're not capturing kind of that fluctuation or that increase there, and really how many FTE did the board fund in 2019 versus how many are in the current year's budget.
But I guess what I'm curious about is how you count them. So for example, say if there were 5 FTE that were added, but they were like not a good practice, but they were added with one-time only funding. Say the next year they get converted to ongoing. Is that a new FTE?
It depends on the time frame that we're looking at. So for this graph, we're looking at 2019 to 2026. So if they were converted, but it is going to pick up some very small, like the sheriff's office has, I think
Let's just take the district attorney's office. On slide 36, you have it having a 15 point FTE change when I'm thinking some of those were conversions from one-time only to ongoing. Is that what that is? Or I'm just trying to understand how you count things.
If it was an FTE, regardless of how it was funded, that's what we're comparing to. So in the DA's 2026 budget, we know a significant amount of his FTE that were budgeted last year with one-time only funding are now budgeted with ongoing funding due to that conversion that we did before we even started the process. So those FTE are showing up. Those FTE, we're just comparing back to 2019 to say what is the net increase for any given budget for any department or by bargaining unit.
One more, please, Stacia. Okay, so we're going to look at the trajectory of average benefits and insurance costs per FTE. So if you go all the way back to 2019, just on top of the wages that we were paying employees, on average, there was almost $50,000 of additional costs associated with benefits and insurance. That has grown by 48% to almost $73,000 in fiscal year 2026. So when we're thinking about the causes of this growth, there's really 2 factors that we could consider. So a lot of these fringe and insurance costs are percentages of the base. So if our employee wages go up, then these costs are going to go up along with it. And then also we could have increases in the percentages that are applied to it, or increases in the insurance costs that we apply to employees. So PERS is a great example. As PERS rates go up, this would also go up. So in fiscal year 2024, we had a 9.1% increase. That was the year where we had our last round where we had so many open labor contracts, and those increased ongoing costs were incorporated into the fiscal year 2024 budget. For fiscal year 2026 at 7.2%, that's also a pretty high one. It's a combination of we're still at higher than normal increases in our personnel costs, and then also our PERS rates went up by more than we've seen in the recent past.
I am assuming that our health insurance, although it is increasing, is not directly related to wages. Could we get a graph of the percentage growth of health insurance over that same time period?
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. I'll say during this period, our growth in our health insurance cost has really been like mostly around 2 or 3%. It's 5% this year, so it's a little bit higher. But if we looked even further back, you would see years where it was 14% year over year. So really, because that's been so low, like really PERS dominates most of this. So whatever's going on with PERS is going to show up here. If we go to the next slide, please. Speaking of PERS, yeah. So this is a graph that shows our employee PERS tier status. So if you go back to 2010, between tier 1, tier 2, or OPSRP, sometimes also called tier 3, we were like roughly equal between the three of them. Now in 2025, almost all of our employees are in OPSRP, which is good news because the rate associated with OPSRP is lower. The bad news here, though, is that really all of the unfunded liability in the PERS system is from tier 1 and tier 2 employees. The Oregon Supreme Court has said that once employees earn their benefits, you can't go back and change them in any way. So because we have so few tier 1 and tier 2 employees, it means they've all already retired, they've earned their benefits. So when we think about the unfunded liability going forward, it's kind of the cake is already baked. There's not really much we can do about it other than just try to manage it on our end. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Christian to bring us home.
Great. Oh, sorry. What we want to talk about here is that, and we've been daylighting this with you all, and it's also in my budget director's message because we hide everything in plain sight. We want to make sure that we're being incredibly transparent. Because right now we have a county policy that says after fully funding reserves and contingencies, that 50% of our one-time only resources would be allocated towards IT facilities / capital projects. Right now, this budget in front of you, which is not adopted, I want to acknowledge, and there's still changes to be made. That goal would have been $18.6 million of our funding going towards capital investments. We are currently short of that goal by $7.8 million. One of the big policy trade-offs that we were facing was that in order to include $10 million of support for the city TAS and SRV sites, that was almost 30% of our one-time only funding, 27% of it. So once you take that off the top, there is very difficult to meet that capital investment strategy at 50%. The other thing that I think you are going to be talking about as we talk about our capital investments is we're really at this place with capital investments where we have some needs for small capital investments and small capital projects, but a lot of those next tier investments really push us into needing a larger funding strategy to be able to figure out how we're going to fund them ongoing. And so I think also, inserting that conversation into this conversation is going to be really important for the board to set that kind of tone what the next 4 or 5 years look like. We have some pretty big investments on the horizon that we really don't have that funding strategy for. We will note this in the policy. If we end up being short of this goal, we have a status area, we will note it. Really, that policy is to put guardrails around the use of one-time only. We do not like to see ourselves falling short of that year after year after year. I can tell you in the early 2000s and mid 2000s, we have some other policy areas where we make investments where the board had decided to maybe suspend those investments for 1 year. But then we really wanted to make sure, like with everything, that we have a plan of how we get back to making those investments. It wasn't around one time only, it was around maybe 8% increase for capital fees to make sure that we're maintaining our buildings and doing those kinds of investments. And so, out of all of the things that we could be looking at,
this policy has the least impact on our ongoing resources and our ongoing maintenance, but there is us coming up short of that policy. So I just wanted to daylight that.
Wouldn't the board need to waive the policy?
You, as adopting the budget, you would acknowledge that we're not meeting the status of that
Wouldn't we
policy.
do that before it happened?
The budget hasn't been adopted yet, so as part of the budget adoption
But we
and the
have a
new finance.
policy and it's the
So
the introduced budget, it does not align with board policy, so it seems like we don't just waive it afterwards. I mean, that seems like
It would be part of our discussion in the budget process. So next week, we'll have the budget and financial policies process, and then you have to adopt those policies. So we would incorporate this status update into that, and as part of that, you all would be adopting that as part of our policies.
right. But the budget policy that we adopted last year as part of the budget process, this doesn't align with it, correct?
That's correct. That's why we bring new policies to you all every year to adopt.
Just from a governance standpoint, it seems like we should follow the policies unless, and this is not how the money's spent or anything, but it seems like if we're not going to follow in order to like deviate from our policy, it seems like it should be waived in advance versus as an afterthought.
So the FY24 budget aligns with all of the policies that were adopted when the FY25 budget was adopted. This is a proposed budget for FY26, and now, and what is being proposed in my budget is that we deviate from a policy. If we want to do that deviation, that policy deviation will be reflected in what we adopt for FY26.
Right, but our policies that are current, that govern our work, that exist right now, don't allow this versus we're going to rely on something that we may change later. It's a governance point, I think. Again,
I think it may be that there's disagreement on how this process works, but to me, this isn't a deviation from policy until we make the decision as a board on if we're going to do this or say no, and either move the 10 million allocated to shelters or something else back into contingency. So for me, this is part of what the budget process is. I appreciate the call out because I think it's important that this be seen, but I don't want to get stuck on a proposed budget where I feel like we still have a lot of opportunity to change what the actual budget is and how we decide to follow or not follow previous policy, budget policy.
I appreciate that. I guess one of the things when I got on the commission, there was a question about like, does board policy mean anything, or do you have to put something in the ordinance? So since we don't have a very robust policy process, or they don't even exist anywhere in one central place particularly, I think it's a good question for us when we think about our governance is like, what does the policy mean? What do the policy means? Is it enforceable? Or should we be doing things in ordinance because that actually should, in theory, should be enforceable? Because if we can just waive our policies afterwards, and for the external community, I think then the policies start being somewhat meaningless. And appreciate your point.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, we're not waiving anything ahead of time. This is about what we're going to be doing on June 12th when we adopt the budget as well as all of the policies. So I just want to be very clear about that.
Or approving it in 3 weeks.
Sure, yeah.
It's still not the final budget, though. I just want to, you're approving it, but then we still have to go through the budget adoption phase, which is the final phase of the budget.
And even at the approval stage, if we decide not to do it this way and put it back into policy, it doesn't increase the fund by 10%.
That's correct.
Thank you.
We can go to the next slide, please. So we're trying to summarize a $4 billion budget here.
we wanted to highlight some of the big takeaways. So what this budget does, unfortunately, is implements $25.7 million of general fund reductions. That is also on top of, as you saw, flat kind of year over year for both the federal state fund and our supportive housing services fund, which the departments will talk more about those impacts when they come and talk to you. We also have reductions in FTE, but that is coming after kind of a significant growth period in FTE for the county. We also anticipate that this budget does not build in any future personnel cost increases. So anything related to inflation concerns, if we see huge PERS increases, we also know that we have 6 open labor contracts. So all of those things will need to then, we'll adjust this budget from where it is today. We anticipate that we'll probably have some fall rebalance session with you all related to state decisions when we get all of that finalized from the state, which, as you saw earlier, is a pretty significant impact to our budget. We like to think that about 2/3 of our operating budget is coming from the state, so there will be impacts from that as well. And again, the departments will talk to you about very specific things related to their departments and how the state funds them when they come and talk to you. I am going to go to the next slide, but I think I'm going to leave it here. We have a few slides here that really says all the ways that you can find information. Our dashboard is live. We really want to make sure that we're meeting all your requirements. Again, there's a lot of information in the appendix of this slide, and then we will be following up with lots of other spreadsheets for you because it is our favorite thing to do. So with that, we will, I will pause and stop talking and let you all ask more questions.
Great, thank you. So I just want to say we're over, obviously, but I want to say we have weeks and weeks ahead of us of the budget work. So if there are some specific questions on the slides that didn't get answered as we were moving through them, that's great. If this is the answer to those questions or something that we will hear in the upcoming weeks, it would be great to hear that as well. So just wanted to open up. Were there any burning questions that folks had?
Yeah, one of the things that I'm trying to wrap my head around is what drove particular program or FTE growth. And a data point that is I can't find in the documents is like the number of people served in correlation with that, because I think there's a real question in my mind of, you know, did we see budget and FTE growth because we expanded services, or it's a mandated caseload or whatever, versus we are delivering it different, or we want different outcomes or whatever. But I'm having a hard time differentiating reasons for different program changes. I don't know if that's something you have or the departments might need to help.
It's a really excellent question, Commissioner. And in the appendix, you'll see we have each department broken out for this so that you can see that. And that really is going to come from the departments. We know some of the top level ones, right? We know the expansion of Preschool for All added 58 FTE over time, right? So that those 58 FTE did not exist in 2019 in County Human Services. Now they do exist. Same with the Joint Office. They're looking at, 100 plus FTE Homeless Services Department growth. So some of those, and then we also know in aging, we really did do a pretty significant expansion thanks to the state and really recognizing the need for that work. That work's almost all case management and primarily resides with us. So I think as the departments come, they can, maybe we can take those slides and give you little like call outs for each year of kind of the major things that we're changing for those departments.
You'll be shocked that I have something to say about SHS, I'm sure. One thing I don't notice is anywhere that we talk about SHS one time only, and I'm assuming that is what we are terming carryover in the program offers. Thank you.
I think right now it's roughly about $47 million, so significantly lower than we've seen in the past.
Okay, thank you. Oh, go ahead.
Is this, you're about ready to end?
Yes, so go ahead.
Just a couple comments on the slides and more to come, because you can bury us with information, but we can bury you with questions. Goes two ways.
That was not a challenge. I do not accept that challenge.
Just responding to the, just responding from the throwdown from Jeff about what's to come. On slide 13, the budget process is, I'm really hoping that as we move forward, the budget process is laid out as a year-long process and not just something that ends on June 12th, because I think one of the sort of biggest deficiencies in the budget process, not the creation, is that the board and its oversight role and monitoring what's happening through the year versus it's not just like, we're done, go do your work, because then we, throughout the year, are getting budget modifications, things are changing. I mean, this year, certainly also with the legislature potentially impacting our funds, but also the federal government actions it may take, that I hope we have an expanded budget process that looks, it's a year-long process. Then also just, this is a general just thing, something I'm concerned about is that the huge expansion of contracted work versus work done by county employees. In the chart on page 24, it starts, there's a gap, but it's getting smaller. And a couple things happen there. It's like my question I have about living wages for contracted employees or contracted workers, but also just our level of oversight, accountability, the way that that's managed. So I'm just flagging that as a concern. On the slide on taxes and fees, that has the bubbles, the mustard and the purple. There's a 22% increase in taxes and a 1.3% increase in fees. And I'm wondering if you could break that out. What's just the natural, like, assessed values went up, so therefore we collected more taxes versus there's something proposed here that actually increases. So if you could just call it like the dollar amount and the percent from each of those. I know that the proposed restaurant fees does that. That's an increase versus just like, we have more restaurants, so we get more taxes. And then I already asked for the breakout of the new versus reduced FTEs. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. That was the first of many marathon budget sessions that we have in front of us, so gear up. So that concludes today's budget work sessions, but our next meeting will be tomorrow at 9 a.m. for budget work session number 2. So we will be adjourned, there being no further business.